Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. The Harry Potter universe is filled with vibrant and memorable characters. Some basked in glory, others became fan favorites, but a few were unjustly left in the shadows. Today I invite you to take a closer look at these quieter heroes, because behind their modest appearances lie traits that are truly admirable. Make yourself comfortable. Let's begin. Number 1, Lavender Brown. More than a love-struck girl. Many remember Lavender as nothing more than Ron's clingy crush, but the books offer a different picture. Lavender is lively, cheerful, sincere, and has a sparkling sense of humor. She's a true Gryffindor, friendly, brave, and fiercely loyal. She also shared a special bond with Professor Trelawney. Lavender was one of the few students genuinely interested in divination, perhaps sensing something deeper in it. And during the Battle of Hogwarts, she fought courageously until she was gravely wounded. In the books, however, she survives, an important detail that adds depth to her character. Number 2, Barty Crouch Jr., more than just a villain. In The Goblet of Fire, Barty is portrayed as a brilliant, cunning and ruthless follower of Voldemort, but if we look deeper, he's not just an antagonist, he's a tragic figure. The son of a high-ranking ministry official who was too blinded by ambition to give his child love or attention. This emotional void gave rise to a monster. And yet the paradox, for an entire year, disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, Barty taught defense against the dark arts. And frankly, he did a remarkable job. His character is a complex mix of intelligence, hidden vulnerability, and dark obsession, making him one of the most layered figures in the saga. Number 3, Fleur Delacour. Courage, grace, and loyalty. Fleur is often remembered simply as the beautiful girl from the Tri-Wizard tournament, but her story runs deeper. Beneath the glamour lies strength, willpower, and the courage to be herself. She showed bravery and determination during the tournament, but her true character blossomed later, when she became part of the Weasley family. Instead of the proud French girl we expected, we saw a devoted partner to Bill, standing by him in joy and in hardship. She didn't run when he was mauled and disfigured by a werewolf. Her love only grew stronger. And yes, she fought in the Battle of Hogwarts like the rest. Number 4, Regulus Arcturus Black, a hero in the shadows. He's rarely mentioned, which is a shame, because Regulus carried out one of the most remarkable and quiet acts in the entire series. Still a teenager, he joined the Death Eaters, following the Black family tradition. But he soon realized he'd made a terrible choice. He was the first to try to destroy one of Voldemort's Horcruxes. He acted alone, knowing it would cost him his life. He also showed real compassion. Kreacher the house elf never forgot the kindness Regulus gave him. Regulus stands as a symbol of redemption, bravery, and tragic self-sacrifice. Number 5, Charlie Weasley, the unsung hero. If you've only seen the films, you might not even know Charlie exists, but he's one of the most charismatic and intriguing members of the Weasley family. Charlie was once captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team, and according to Oliver Wood, could have gone pro. Instead, he chose a different path, working with dragons. Kind, fearless, and determined, Charlie didn't seek glory but always showed up when it mattered. He joined the Order of the Phoenix and followed his passion for magical creatures with a quiet intensity that speaks volumes. Number 6, Andromeda Tonks. Andromeda Tonks was born a Black, raised in a house where blood mattered more than kindness, but she did what few dared. She chose love over legacy. Like her cousin Sirius, she broke from the family line. She married Ted Tonks, a Muggle-born. Her name was burned off the family tapestry. Her sisters, Bellatrix and Narcissa, never forgave her, but Andromeda never looked back. She built a life from truth, not fear. Her world collapsed during the war. Ted was killed in the woods, hunted for his blood. Then her daughter Nymphadora died in the Battle of Hogwarts. Hours later, Remus Lupin fell too. Andromeda was left alone in a house full of silence, with a baby in her arms. Teddy Lupin. She didn't wail or vanish. She didn't become bitter. She became the anchor, the grandmother who would raise the son of two heroes after losing everything she ever loved. We never see her at the funeral, we never hear her speak, but her strength echoes through Teddy's story. Andromeda Tonks, widow, mother, outcast, stood against her cursed bloodline and chose the light. In a world of dark magic, she remained human. Dignified, unbreakable, she lost a war inside her home long before Voldemort rose, and still survived. Number 7, Arabella Fig. Arabella Fig smelled like cabbage and talked about cats. That's all Harry thought, until the night the Dementors came. In the Order of the Phoenix, after Dudley collapsed in the alley, and Harry was left breathless, it was Mrs. Fig who appeared out of the shadows. "Don't put your wand away, idiot boy," she barked. She wasn't helpless, she wasn't clueless. She had been watching him for years, on Dumbledore's orders, blending in with muggles, pretending to be just another nosy neighbour. But she had eyes open and ears sharp, ready to act. When the Ministry tried to expel Harry for using magic in front of a muggle, Arabella Fig stood before the Wizengamot and told the truth. "I saw them, Dementors, 2 of them," she testified. Some in the court sneered. She was a squib, powerless, but her words cut through the lies and saved Harry from being cast out. She didn't need magic to be brave. She didn't need spells to be useful. Arabella Fig had loyalty. She had courage. And when it mattered most, she stepped into the light. Number 8, Ted Tonks. Ted Tonks didn't wear a famous name. He wasn't a war hero or an aura. He was a father, a husband, and a muggle-born wizard who loved his family and stood for what was right. When the Ministry fell under Voldemort's control, Ted was declared a criminal just for his blood. He could have begged for mercy, tried to disappear quietly, but he didn't. He went on the run. He joined other fugitives in the woods, Dirk Cresswell, Dean Thomas, Griphook. Together they stayed alive for a while. In the Deathly Hallows, we hear his voice through the stolen radio. "Ted Tonks here. Still breathing." His voice was warm, even cheerful, but behind that voice was exhaustion, danger, hunger. He knew what he was risking. Every moment in hiding meant death was one step closer, and still he kept others going. He helped keep the resistance alive, one campfire at a time. He never got a wand duel in the Great Hall, no grand farewell. His death came in a quiet forest at the hands of snatchers, surrounded, betrayed, and alone. But he never gave them what they wanted. He never gave in. He died standing, the same way he lived, for truth, for dignity, for his wife, Andromeda, for his daughter, Tonks, for a world he wanted to see change. No statue was built for Ted Tonks. No portrait hangs at Hogwarts, but without people like him, the war would have been lost before it began. His sacrifice was silent. His courage was real. That's what makes him unforgettable. Number 9, Ernie Macmillan. Ernie Macmillan was never the loudest in the room. He wasn't the quickest with a spell or the first to grab a broom, but he was always there, a steady voice, a loyal friend, and one of the few who stood by Harry when it mattered most. In the Order of the Phoenix, after Voldemort's return was denied by the Ministry, Ernie made his choice. "I just want you to know, Potter, that I believe you," he said, breaking away from whispers and doubts that even his closest housemates held. For a Hufflepuff, truth mattered more than comfort. He joined Dumbledore's army not for glory, but because it was right. He trained alongside Neville and Luna, learned defensive spells under Harry's lead. He wasn't a natural fighter, but he worked, practiced, showed up. When the final battle came, Ernie didn't hesitate. He stayed in Hogwarts, wand at the ready, and fought for everything that school had taught him: justice, loyalty, and standing together. Hufflepuffs don't abandon their own. Ernie proved it. In the Deathly Hallows, we see him rallying students during the siege. While others panicked, Ernie helped organize the defense. He wasn't there for praise. No reporter wrote his name. But he was there in the thick of it, casting shields over fallen friends and refusing to fall back. His bravery was quiet, his strength consistent. In a world of grand heroes, Ernie Macmillan was the kind you build a future on. Number 10, Madame Pomfrey. Madame Pomfrey never held a wand in battle. She didn't wear armor or robes of the Order, but she was there every time. After every cursed duel, after every Quidditch disaster, after every bad potion, she patched up broken bones and souls with the same calm hands. In the Chamber of Secrets, when Harry's arm turned to jelly thanks to Gilderoy Lockhart's incompetence, she didn't panic. She simply muttered, "Honestly, what were you expecting?" and began the slow, painful process of regrowing his bones. She didn't care about fame. She didn't care about house points or family names. When Draco Malfoy faked injuries on the Quidditch pitch, she still gave him treatment. When Fred and George stumbled in with fireworks burns, she didn't scold, she simply worked. In the Goblet of Fire, after the Triwizard Tournament, Cedric Diggory was dead. Harry was covered in cuts and shock, and the world was changing. Madame Pomfrey was there, quiet, ready. "He's in no fit state," she snapped at Cornelius Fudge, shielding Harry like a lioness. She saw it all, the cursed scars, the poisonings, the near-death nights, and she never once asked for a reward. Not when she treated Katie Bell after the cursed necklace, not when she tended to Ron after being poisoned in The Half-Blood Prince. She was always the last person standing in the infirmary when the school needed healing. Even in the Battle of Hogwarts, with bodies piling up, Pomfrey worked without pause. "We've done what we can," she told Professor Sprout. But she kept trying anyway. Number 11, Justin Finch Fletchley. Justin Finch Fletchley nearly died in his second year at Hogwarts. He was found petrified on the floor, stiff as stone, a victim of the basilisk unleashed from the Chamber of Secrets. Being Muggle-born made him a target. And yet, after waking up in the hospital wing, he didn't transfer schools. He didn't retreat in fear. He came back to class, raised his hand in lessons, and kept his quiet, polite smile. That kind of courage doesn't come with a wand flourish. It lives in small, stubborn acts of resilience. In the Order of the Phoenix, Justin joins Dumbledore's army. He trains with Harry, learns defensive spells, and practices disarming techniques alongside Hannah Abbott and Susan Bones. He's not the loudest, not the strongest, but he's there every meeting, steady, reliable, and determined. When Harry tries to teach the Patronus charm, Justin is among those who give it everything. His spell isn't perfect, but he doesn't give up. In the room of requirement, surrounded by classmates and flickering candlelight, he becomes part of something greater than himself. During the Battle of Hogwarts, Justin returns to fight. He could have run, he could have hidden. Instead, he chose to stay. He fought alongside Ernie Macmillan and the rest of the Hufflepuffs, defending the school that once left him petrified in a corridor. That moment matters. Because bravery isn't about being fearless, it's about being afraid and showing up anyway. And Justin showed up. He never had a famous family name, no prophecies, no chosen legacy, just a boy from a non-magical background who stood his ground when the world turned dark. The books don't linger on him, the films never mention his name, but in the shadow of war, Justin Finch Fletchley stood tall, wand in hand, ready to defend the only home he'd ever known. And that, too, is heroism. Number 12, Aberforth Dumbledore. Aberforth Dumbledore never tried to be a hero. He wasn't charming like Albus. He didn't speak in riddles or wear extravagant robes. He ran the Hog's Head pub, a dusty corner of Hogsmeade where shady deals were made, and no one asked questions. But behind the rough voice and bitter glares was a man who had seen too much, lost too much, and still chose to do the right thing. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione were desperate and hunted, Aberforth didn't hesitate. He opened the passage behind Ariana's portrait. "I'm not my brother, you know," he said. "I'm not forgiving, I'm not kind, but I can still help you." Years earlier, Aberforth had watched his younger sister, Ariana, die in a three-way duel between himself, Albus, and Gellert Grindelwald. He blamed Albus for her death and never truly forgave him. He sacrificed her, Aberforth once told Harry. She was a convenience. His bitterness wasn't cold, it burned, and it shaped the man he became. He didn't fight on grand stages or make speeches, but when Hogwarts was no longer safe, it was Aberforth who turned his tavern into a lifeline for the resistance. Students, rebels, the wounded, they all passed through the secret tunnel he protected. Even in the heat of war, Aberforth kept his distance. He didn't join the Order again. He didn't try to lead, but he stood guard. He listened. He watched. And in the final hours before the Battle of Hogwarts, it was his help that allowed the DA and the Order to regroup. He sent a message through Neville Longbottom and kept the tunnel open, not for glory, not for redemption, just because someone had to. Number 13, Olympe Maxime. When Olympe Maxime first entered the Great Hall of Hogwarts in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, she was impossible to ignore. Draped in black satin and adorned with opals, she towered above every other guest. Her presence exuded an air of aristocracy and formality. And yet, behind the spectacle lay a character far deeper, braver, and more principled than most readers give her credit for. Olympe was not merely the grand, exotic headmistress from France, or a comic relief in her interactions with Rubeus Hagrid. She was a powerful witch, a respected educator, and a woman of intense loyalty who risked her life in the shadowed corners of the wizarding world, all while navigating the complexities of politics, prejudice, and war. Maxime's first impression was admittedly filtered through Harry's eyes, a boy not yet 15, for whom adults were often either mentors or caricatures. To him, Maxime was striking, mysterious, even somewhat theatrical. Rowling described her as enormous, yet elegant, her manners graceful, and voice rich with a French accent. The image stuck. For many readers, Maxime became the giant French lady who liked horses and Hagrid. Yet buried beneath her fashionable shoes was the will of iron that placed her among the unsung heroes of the Second Wizarding War. As the headmistress of Beauxbatons, one of the most prestigious magical academies in Europe, Maxime led with dignity and pride. Unlike Igor Karkaroff, the paranoid and elitist headmaster of Durmstrang, Maxime did not present herself as superior or dismissive. She expected excellence but treated others with courtesy. Her commitment to her students was apparent during the Triwizard Tournament, particularly in her support of Fleur Delacour. She travelled with her school across countries to Hogwarts, confident enough to show Beauxbaton's strength while honouring its values. During the tournament, Maxime's reaction to injustice was immediate and impassioned. When Fleur was attacked by Grindylows in the lake and failed the second task, Maxime didn't scoff or shame her. She expressed concern and motherly warmth. Her face, usually so composed, betrayed a flicker of worry, revealing not only her care for her students, but her depth as a character. She respected rules but was unafraid to challenge authority when necessary. When Hogwarts' biased judges favoured Harry or allowed dangerous twists, Maxime expressed her disapproval, though always with restrained diplomacy. This showed that she understood power dynamics and how to maneuver within them. The subtleties of Maxime's character deepened after the death of Cedric Diggory. When Dumbledore made his controversial speech about Voldemort's return, many in the room recoiled or stayed silent. Maxime did not. She didn't rush to object or align with the Ministry's version of events. Instead, she maintained eye contact with Dumbledore. Rowling never spells out her thoughts in that moment, but Maxime's later choices reveal what side she had taken in her heart. What truly elevates Maxime beyond a background figure is her involvement in one of the most dangerous missions of the Order of the Phoenix. When giants were identified as potential allies for Voldemort, Dumbledore knew that reaching them first would be crucial. The mission was perilous, the terrain unfamiliar, and the odds of success slim. Yet Maxime agreed to accompany Hagrid into the mountains, well aware of the risks. This wasn't a diplomatic tea party. It was a journey through harsh landscapes to negotiate with volatile, violent creatures who had once followed the Dark Lord. And she did so not for personal glory or political gain, but because she understood the stakes of the war. Her role on this mission is too often minimized. Hagrid may have been the emotional heart of the endeavor, but Maxime was its backbone. She understood politics better than Hagrid, navigated their interactions with the Gurgs, the giant leaders, with more grace, and knew when to speak and when to hold back. She kept Hagrid alive when he got himself injured, helped him escape from Gurgolgamath when diplomacy failed, and endured the hardships of giant territory without complaint. Madame Maxime was magnificent, Hagrid later said. Strong as any of them. Clever, too. She got us out of trouble more than once. That acknowledgement alone shows how much her presence meant. It's easy to forget that during this time, being seen with Dumbledore, or even believing him, was politically dangerous. The Ministry of Magic, under Cornelius Fudge, was in full denial. Any known supporter of Dumbledore was marked as a rebel, potentially disloyal to the ministry. Yet Maxime, as the headmistress of a school outside Britain, had even more to lose. Her presence in giant territory, her alignment with British resistance figures, it could have drawn the ire of the French Ministry of Magic or cost her credibility back home. Still she went. It was a decision grounded in conscience, not convenience. Maxime's half-giant heritage also adds an undercurrent of profound significance to her story, though she adamantly denied it when questioned by Rita Skeeter, saying, "I have big bones." It is almost certain that she, like Hagrid, was the child of a giantess. This makes her decision to go on the mission to the giants all the more meaningful. It was personal, but not self-serving. She understood how isolated and misunderstood giant kin were in the magical world. She used her knowledge to bridge the divide between two warring cultures. Unlike Hagrid, who wore his background openly, Maxime had spent her life masking it, learning to exist with dignity in a world that would judge her before she spoke a word. Her self-presentation, her opulent dresses, her controlled accent, her polished elegance was her armor. In many ways, her relationship with Hagrid also revealed another layer of her personality. Though often played for laughs, their bond was genuine. She admired his kindness, his courage, and his loyalty. They clashed, yes, especially over their differing views on giants and identity. But Maxime's decision to join him, to sleep under trees and face giant attacks, wasn't born out of romantic curiosity. It was a statement. She too was willing to fight. Their connection was a subtle thread of mutual respect wrapped in awkwardness and unspoken truths. Number 14, Creature. Of all the creatures inhabiting the wizarding world, few undergo as profound a transformation as Creature, the old house elf bound to the noble and most ancient house of Black. At first glance, Creature is the embodiment of everything unpleasant, a bitter, muttering creature, spewing insults under his breath, clinging to outdated ideals of blood purity. Readers meeting him in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix find little to admire. He skulks in the shadows of Number 12, Grimmauld Place, whispering venomous thoughts about mudbloods and half-bloods, grumbling against the very people trying to fight Voldemort. But beneath his wrinkled skin there lies a story few could expect, a tale of loyalty, heartbreak, and ultimate redemption. Creature is the product of centuries of servitude in a family steeped in pure blood ideology. The Black family, proud and prejudiced, treated him not as a living creature but as a relic to maintain and command. While Burger Black, Sirius's mother, was particularly cruel and dismissive, though Creature loved her all the same, as he was trained to do. Her portrait, permanently affixed to the wall and screaming obscenities, remained the voice of authority in his life long after her death. He clung to her memory, cleaning her likeness with reverent care. This blind devotion was not affection, it was indoctrination. And yet, even within that conditioning, Creature bore the weight of real emotion. One of the deepest wounds in Creature's soul was the betrayal he felt from Sirius Black. Sirius, who had rejected his family's values and rebelled against its legacy, treated Creature with disdain. He insulted him, ordered him about without kindness, and never once acknowledged the pain or confusion the elf must have felt. "Get out!" Sirius barked at him more than once, showing the same contempt his family had shown him. In a tragic irony, Sirius, who had suffered so much under his family's twisted rules, became, in Creature's eyes, just another oppressor. The elf's loyalty, therefore, did not lie with the Order, but with the memory of the Blacks as he had always known them. And yet within this bitterness there was a hidden ember of devotion, not to blood purity, but to someone who had shown him something genuine. That someone was Regulus Arcturus Black, Sirius's younger brother. Regulus was a Death Eater, yes, but one who had a change of heart. When he discovered the horrific truth behind Voldemort's quest for immortality, the existence of Horcruxes, he tried to stop it, but he did not do so alone. He called upon Kreacher, asked him for help, and more importantly, treated him with trust. In a moment that echoes with quiet tragedy, Kreacher recalls, "Master Regulus said he had to go alone, and he made me drink the potion." The pain Kreacher endured to carry out this order was never forgotten. After watching Regulus die, dragged beneath the waters by Inferi in the cave, Kreacher returned home, broken. And yet he obeyed Regulus's final command to destroy the locket, Horcrux. This task, impossible to complete with the knowledge he had, haunted Kreacher for decades. He kept the locket, unable to destroy it, and protected it as a memory of the only wizard who had ever truly respected him. The Black family never knew of Regulus's heroism. Kreacher never shared it until Harry Potter, of all people, asked him the truth, not with anger, but with kindness. The moment Harry offered Kreacher the locket, the elf's demeanor changed entirely. For the first time he was not being ordered, punished, or ignored, he was being recognized. That simple act of respect, returning Regulus's locket and treating Kreacher with dignity, cracked the shell he had worn for so long. Kreacher began to speak with purpose, to cook with care, to clean not out of resentment but from a sense of belonging. When Harry asked him to find the thief Mundungus Fletcher, who had stolen the locket, Kreacher obeyed, not because he had to, but because he wanted to help. This transformation reached its peak during the Battle of Hogwarts. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the House Elves, led by Kreacher, joined the fight. Kreacher had come to fight, the book reads. In the lead was Kreacher, his locket of Regulus bouncing on his thin chest, his tiny fists clutching a heavy saucepan. Here was a Kreacher once defined by resentment, now marching into war for the sake of freedom, justice, and the memory of the one person who had shown him decency. It is a moment of profound beauty, a culmination of a lifetime's pain turning into purpose. What makes Kreacher's journey so compelling is how quietly it unfolds. There is no grand epiphany, no magical redemption spell. Instead, it is a slow process of healing through empathy. When Hermione Granger first met Kreacher, she immediately advocated for his dignity, much to the annoyance of Ron and even Harry. She saw his cruelty not as evil, but as a symptom of abuse. Her perspective, though often dismissed, proved to be true. Kreacher was not wicked, he was wounded. The pain he carried was not merely personal, it was generational, inherited from centuries of magical enslavement. House elves were bred to obey, to suffer in silence, to punish themselves for disobedience. When Kreacher banged his head against the oven or tried to injure himself, he was not just throwing a tantrum, he was reliving a lifetime of dehumanization. That Harry eventually came to understand this speaks volumes about his growth as a character, and it is Kreacher who helps him understand what it means to lead not by force, but by example. There is a significant contrast between Kreacher and Dobby, another house elf who plays a crucial role in the series. Dobby was freed by Harry and he embraced his freedom with joy and purpose. Kreacher, on the other hand, was never freed, but he was redeemed. Both elves, in their own ways, challenged the wizarding world's perceptions of servitude and personhood, but Kreacher's story is far more nuanced, grounded in internal struggle rather than external liberation. His evolution also mirrors that of the series itself. Harry Potter begins with clear lines of good and evil, heroes and villains. But as the story deepens, so do the characters. Kreacher embodies this complexity. He is not good, not bad, but profoundly human in the emotions he exhibits: loyalty, grief, confusion, pride. That J.K. Rowling chose to give him a second chance speaks to the series' core theme, that redemption is possible even for the most broken. Number 15, Dean Thomas. Dean Thomas was never the loudest voice in the room, nor the most celebrated name in the great chronicles of Hogwarts. Yet behind every tale of legendary bravery, there lies a quieter thread, a steady heart that refuses to waver when all else breaks. Dean was that thread. While others bore the marks of fame, he bore the quiet burden of survival, and in doing so, carved a story of strength far greater than any headline could capture. He was a half-blood, raised in the Muggle world, unaware of his wizarding lineage until his Hogwarts letter arrived. His father, a wizard, had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, later revealed to have been murdered by Death Eaters for refusing to join their cause. But Dean never knew that. Raised by a loving Muggle mother and stepfather, he grew up among football fields and sketchbooks, never realizing that magic pulsed in his veins. His identity was forged not in grandeur but in the ordinary, and this would become the cornerstone of his resilience. When Dean arrived at Hogwarts, he was sorted into Gryffindor, not because he was daring in the traditional sense, but because there was an unshakable steel inside him, calm and unwavering. He became fast friends with Seamus Finnegan and was often seen laughing with the Gryffindor boys. But even in the comfort of his house, Dean often remained slightly apart, not out of aloofness, but because his path was different and somehow lonelier. He was always watching, always absorbing, and always understanding more than he let on. In Order of the Phoenix, Dean joins Dumbledore's army. This choice, seemingly small compared to Harry's grand battles, was in truth a monumental declaration. He wasn't the chosen one, he wasn't even a prefect. But he chose to fight. He chose to learn defensive spells, not because he had any grand prophecy driving him, but because he saw the growing darkness and knew he had to stand against it. Dean Thomas was good too, as noted in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, when Harry reflects on who had done well in the DA meetings. That subtle recognition is all Dean ever needed. When Voldemort rose to power and the Ministry began persecuting Muggle-borns, Dean was forced to make a terrible choice. Though his blood status was unclear to him, he didn't know his father was magical. He knew enough to understand that staying meant capture, torture, or death. So, he disappeared, not to hide in safety, but to join the shadows where other fugitives lived. He became a man without a home, hunted for being born of the wrong blood, wandering the edges of a country twisted by fear. It was during this time that Dean showed what true courage looked like. He travelled with fellow runaways, Ted Tonks, Dirk Cresswell, Griphook the Goblin, and Gornock. In the wilderness, far from the warm walls of Gryffindor Tower, Dean became a part of a different kind of resistance, not in flashy duels, but in enduring the cold, evading snatchers and witnessing death. Ted Tonks was murdered, Dirk Cresswell too, Gornock was slain, and Dean was eventually captured. Yet through all this, Dean never broke. He never turned bitter. He never gave up on the hope that the world could be right again. Captured by snatchers and imprisoned in Malfoy Manor, Dean's story almost ended in silence, but fate intervened. Dobby the house elf came, and the prisoners were freed. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Dean's escape from Malfoy Manor is a blur in the narrative of Harry's larger battle. But for Dean, that moment was a rebirth. He returned not to hide, but to continue the fight. He joined the resistance within Hogwarts, fighting alongside the reformed Dumbledore's army in the final battle. He wasn't just a body in the crowd. Dean fought in the Battle of Hogwarts, wand raised, heart steady. He fought not for glory, but for every friend he had lost, every injustice he had endured, every day he had spent cold and hunted. His presence wasn't shouted in the books, but it was there, fierce, determined, and unshakable. Dean Thomas was dueling a Death Eater beside Parvati Patil, the book notes simply. In Deathly Hallows, no fanfare, no spotlight, just action, just bravery. What makes Dean's story remarkable is its ordinariness. Or he wasn't the boy who lived, he wasn't the hero of prophecy, but he was the boy who stayed kind when others grew cruel, the boy who stood his ground when escape was easier, the boy who fought back when the world tried to erase him. His strength was not forged in legacy, but in hardship, and it held firm even when the world crumbled around him. Unlike Ron Weasley, whose family was legendary, or Neville Longbottom, who carried the weight of his parents' tragedy, Dean's life was quiet. His bravery wasn't backed by prophecy or lineage, it was simply human. He didn't duel Bellatrix Lestrange. He didn't wield the sword of Gryffindor, but he stood beside those who did, unwavering, unafraid, and unacknowledged. And that is the essence of real courage. Dean's loyalty to his friends was profound. In the common room, he stood by Seamus during tensions. In the DA, he trusted Harry's teachings. During his fugitive months, he remained bonded to the values of Hogwarts, even when its walls were far behind him. And in the final moments of battle, he proved that you don't have to be famous to make a difference. You just have to show up. Dean always showed up. Even after the war, Dean's legacy would live on quietly. J.K. Rowling once shared in interviews that Dean had wanted to become an artist, a dream he likely pursued after Voldemort's defeat. Perhaps he painted the scenes he saw in the woods, or portraits of those he lost. Perhaps he sketched the outlines of Dumbledore's army, not as warriors, but as children who had been asked to grow up too fast. Art would have been his healing, his way of reclaiming the narrative. He never sought revenge. He never let hate consume him. Unlike many others who came out of the war fractured and bitter, Dean carried within him a stillness, a quiet fire. He had already faced the worst and survived it. That kind of survival shapes a man. It gives him the power to create, to rebuild, to forgive. And it is in this post-war world that Dean's strength becomes even clearer. Number 16, Katie Bell. Of all the names whispered in the vast tapestry of Hogwarts history, Katie Bell's rarely stands among the heroes. Her name does not gleam in the headlines of the wizarding world, nor is she celebrated with statues or songs. Yet within the shadows of greater destinies, there are stories like hers, quiet, bruised, yet undeniably brave. Katie Bell was more than a Quidditch chaser. She was a fighter in the truest sense, not with wands or curses, but with unrelenting spirit in the face of something the wizarding world often fears the most, the unknown aftermath of trauma. From her very first appearance, Katie Bell was defined by determination. As one of the youngest chasers to join the Gryffindor Quidditch team, she played alongside Oliver Wood, Angelina Johnson, and Alicia Spinett. While Wood shouted tactics and Angelina soared with thunder, Katie moved with a quiet purpose, fierce and focused. Her presence on the team wasn't loud, but it was steadfast. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, she is noted as one of the 3 chasers who contributed to Gryffindor's early victories. Katie Bell scored another 10 points, the commentator announced, often followed by the chaos of broomsticks and bludgers. She was even then reliable, one of those teammates you never had to worry about. Yet her story was never meant to revolve around broomsticks alone. By her 6th year, Hogwarts had changed. Whispers of Voldemort's return were no longer whispers. The hallways felt heavier. And Katie, like so many others, moved through the days with the knowledge that something dark had slipped back into the world. Still, she returned to the Quidditch pitch, practiced with her team, and kept her focus. That year, she played under Harry Potter's captaincy, accepting his leadership without the drama others brought. She was, as always, present, prepared, and proud to represent her house. But then came the incident. It happened on an ordinary Hogsmeade weekend, at least, it seemed ordinary until the horror unfolded. Katie and her friend Leanne had gone to the village, likely with plans no grander than visiting honeydukes or buying quills. But there, Katie was handed a package. Inside it, unbeknownst to her, was a cursed opal necklace, an object laced with dark magic, intended not for her, but for another. And the moment she touched it, the curse surged through her body with terrible violence. The scene in the book is brief, but unforgettable. Her eyes rolled up to the back of her head, her limbs jerked uncontrollably, and she rose up into the air, still writhing and screaming, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. This was not just an accident. This was an attack, silent, calculated, and almost deadly. The opal necklace was meant to kill. Katie Bell nearly died simply because she was kind, because she accepted an errand, unsuspecting, because someone, somewhere, saw her as a tool in a larger game. The curse was so strong that Katie had to be transported immediately to St. Mungo's hospital. She remained there for weeks. Her body had absorbed enough dark magic to kill a grown wizard, and only swift intervention saved her. It's easy to pass over this in the narrative, to see it as a moment of bad luck and move on. But consider the reality. Katie lost a stretch of her life to blankness. Her memory was fragmented, her body likely racked with lingering pain. She was not herself, and she was not to blame. What followed was a period rarely spoken of, even in the series. Katie did not return immediately to Hogwarts. Her friends continued their lives, their studies, their games, while she, alone, fought her way back. There were no grand speeches, no headlines in the Daily Prophet, no Dumbledore waiting with wisdom and chocolate. There was only Katie Bell, her own mind clouded, trying to remember who she had been before that necklace turned her world inside out. And when she did return, she did not seek pity. She returned to finish her schooling. She returned to fly again. She returned to be part of a world that had nearly cast her aside as collateral damage. That kind of strength does not come from spells. It comes from within. What makes Katie's story even more poignant is that she was never told the full truth. Draco Malfoy, the student who arranged the transfer of the necklace, never faced her directly. He used others, hid behind shadows, protected by his family's name and status. Katie became a victim of a plot she didn't understand, a chess piece moved by hands she never saw. Yet instead of folding under that injustice, she stood again. She walked the corridors of Hogwarts not as a symbol of fear, but as someone who had survived the darkest of magic and still found reason to rise. Later that year, the world exploded. Dumbledore was killed. Hogwarts was no longer safe. And still, Katie stayed. When the time came, when the castle itself called its children to arms, Katie Bell did not hesitate. She returned for the Battle of Hogwarts. She stood beside her classmates, many of whom had never suffered as she had. She picked up her wand and said, "This is my home too." During the final battle, while others duelled under the gaze of prophecy and fame, Katie fought because she believed it was right. There is no dramatic description of her during those final hours, no tale of a duel won or a Death Eater bested. But she was there. J.K. Rowling confirmed it. And that is what matters. Courage is not always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to keep showing up after the world has tried to erase you. Katie Bell never received medals. She was never named in the Order of Merlin. She is not textbooks or biographies, but in the grand battle for Hogwarts, where students and teachers united in defiance of tyranny, Katie was not on the sidelines. She had already faced death once and lived, and she chose to face it again, not out of recklessness, but out of duty. We often glorify the ones who lead the charge, who cast the final spell, who stand in the spotlight. But Katie's heroism lies elsewhere, in the slow return to herself, in the decision to trust again, to risk again, to care again. Trauma steals many things from its victims. It steals memory, identity, and confidence. But it did not steal Katie's integrity. She is a reminder that Hogwarts was never protected by chosen ones alone. It was saved by dozens, maybe hundreds, of students like her, who returned to a castle under siege because it was home, who faced enemies stronger than themselves because they had once known peace, who had no guarantee of survival but came anyway. Katie's story challenges us to look deeper at the names we forget, to ask what happened to her next, to realize that pain is not a footnote, it's a chapter, and survival is not just about living, it's about continuing. She represents every student who endured the war without headlines, every quiet warrior who walked back into danger after barely escaping it once. Even after the battle, one can only imagine the silence that followed, the great hall filled with the wounded and the grieving, and somewhere among them was Katie Bell. Not the girl who had been cursed, but the woman who had faced the darkness and refused to be its prisoner. She may have never said it aloud, but her actions echo louder than words. I was almost destroyed, but I chose to fight anyway. The opal necklace still sits in the records of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, tagged as evidence in the Malfoy case. Its curse has been studied, catalogued, and locked away. But the legacy it left behind is not in files or case numbers. It lives in Katie's decision to return to Hogwarts, to stand among her peers, to reclaim her name. Katie Bell teaches us that bravery is not always a matter of boldness. Sometimes it is quiet endurance. Sometimes it's the way you walk back into the hall where you once collapsed. Sometimes it's knowing you could fall again and still choosing to stand. In the end, Katie never sought to be a symbol, but in a world still healing from war, her resilience speaks volumes. She was never the star of the story, but in the quiet pages between the louder ones, she glows. Not with magic, but with humanity. And perhaps that's the lesson Hogwarts gave us all, that greatness lies not only in prophecy or power, but in every ordinary student who refused to be broken. Katie Bell, the girl who touched a curse and came back stronger, is one of them. Number 17, Emmeline Vance. She was there when others turned away. Cloaked in silence and shadow, Emmeline Vance did not seek glory, applause, or headlines in the Daily Prophet. Yet her name lingers, half forgotten, half revered, among the ranks of those who fought the long, dark war against Lord Voldemort. A name uttered briefly in Order of the Phoenix, yet spoken with weight by Albus Dumbledore himself. A great loss, he called her death. And Dumbledore was not a man who used words lightly. Emmeline Vance was not a protagonist. Not by the book's standards. She did not wield the Elder Wand, bear a lightning scar, or win a Tri-Wizard Cup. She did not steal the spotlight. Instead, she lived where stories often do not reach, in the shadows between the pages. But for those who look closely, who peer past the obvious and into the margins, Emmeline stands like a pillar, quiet, unshakable, and utterly essential. She was part of the original Order of the Phoenix, the resistance founded during Voldemort's first rise to power. The Order wasn't a school club or a band of rebels seeking glory. It was a desperate, outnumbered gathering of those who refused to surrender their world to darkness. Emmeline, with her regal bearing and determined gaze, was one of the first to step forward when the Ministry remained blind to the threat. Her name appears for the first time in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix when she accompanies a group of wizards tasked with escorting Harry to Grimmauld Place. There, she is described in fleeting but vivid detail, a stately-looking witch in an emerald green shawl. Stately. It is a word that speaks not only to her presence, but her power, poise, and perhaps her past. Emerald, perhaps a reminder of her house, Slytherin or not, or a hint of her affinity for subtlety and strategy. She wasn't the sort to announce her allegiance with dramatic flair. Her strength came not from spectacle, but from steadfastness. It is no coincidence that she was chosen for such a dangerous mission. The flight from Privet Drive to the Order's headquarters was not a task for amateurs. Voldemort's spies were everywhere. The air was thick with whispers of betrayal and sudden disappearance. Yet Emmeline flew straight into it. Trusted by Alastor Moody, chosen by Dumbledore, relied upon by Kingsley Shacklebolt, these facts, though never elaborated upon in full, are telling. She was not a junior member, she was trusted with lives. But what was her story? The books do not tell us, and therein lies the tragedy. In the war against Voldemort, not all stories were written, not all voices were heard. Many fell before anyone had the chance to tell the world who they really were. But if we look closely, the lines between the lines whisper the truth. Emmeline Vance was not merely a body in the background. She was a thread in the tapestry of the Resistance, woven so tightly into its structure that her removal was felt like the snapping of bone. Dumbledore's statement after her death cuts through the noise. Emmeline Vance's death was a terrible loss. And again, he was not given to exaggeration. Dumbledore had seen many fall. He had wept silently for Lily and James. He had buried his own sister. He had mourned silently more than once. But for him to name Emmeline so plainly, so deliberately, was to reveal her significance. She was not a pawn. She was a queen on a board that few ever got to see. Kingsley Shacklebolt was reportedly assigned to protect the Muggle Prime Minister at the time of Emmeline's death. One can imagine the strategic importance of those involved in such high-level operations. Emmeline was likely involved in similar missions, classified, dangerous, unsung. The war was not fought only in forests or castles. It crept into boardrooms, alleys, ministries, and Muggle corridors of power. Her assignments, we can infer, were among the most sensitive. Her death was sudden, brutal, and public. The Daily Prophet reported that she was killed by Death Eaters in a well-organized attack in central London. The choice of location was deliberate. Voldemort and his followers did not simply seek to kill, they sought to intimidate. A murder like this, out in the open, executed with surgical precision, was a message, and the message was clear. No one was safe, not even those who moved in silence. That she was targeted at all speaks volumes. Death Eaters did not waste effort on the irrelevant. They aimed for those who posed a threat. This was not a random act. It was the removal of a key player, a silent sentinel who had seen too much, known too much, and perhaps done too much damage. What secrets did she hold? What missions did she complete? We'll never know, but her death told us one thing. She mattered. Her face never appeared in wizarding portraits. Her voice never rang out across Hogwarts' Great Hall. But Emmeline Vance was part of the invisible scaffolding that held the world up during its darkest days, the kind of witch who stood guard in alleyways while others slept, who intercepted letters coded with death, who broke enchantments woven to kill. She was not loved by history, but she was necessary to its survival. It is easy to remember those who held the wand last. Harry, Hermione, Ron. Their names shine bright in memory, and rightly so, but Emmeline held the line long before the boy who lived returned to the fight. She was there during the years of silence and denial, when the ministry lied and the people looked away, when Voldemort was still a whisper, not a storm. She believed and she acted. Her legacy lives not in a statue or a house name, but in the fact that the Order endured, that Grimmauld Place remained a safe haven, that young wizards lived to see another school year, that Molly Weasley had someone watching her children from afar, that the resistance, though battered, held its ground until reinforcements arrived. She belonged to a generation of witches and wizards who were older, wiser, and already battle-worn when Harry entered the fight. Like Alpheus Doge, Hestia Jones, and Sturgis Podmore, she represented the veterans, the ones who had faced Voldemort before and had chosen to do so again. That decision to return to the fire after already surviving it is a kind of courage far rarer than the bravado of youth. When Sirius Black died, the Order lost a symbol. When Emmeline Vance died, it lost a cornerstone. A woman who never needed the limelight to shine. A protector whose silence was louder than spells. One wonders what her wand was made of. Perhaps yew, like Voldemort's, but used for protection, not destruction. Or perhaps willow, flexible, enduring, unbreakable. It is tempting to believe that characters like Emmeline are placeholders, set pieces to give the illusion of a larger world. But the truth is harsher and far more powerful. These characters are not decorations. They are the glue between scenes, the reason the world feels real, the reason the war feels vast. Without them, the resistance would have been a fantasy. With them, it was a reality soaked in blood, sacrifice, and uncelebrated victories. Her death marked a turning point. It was one of the first cracks in the illusion that the Order was untouchable. Voldemort had returned, and he was striking with precision. The shadows were no longer safe, and those who once moved unseen now became targets. Emmeline's murder sent a wave of fear, but also of defiance. The Order did not collapse. It mourned quietly and pressed forward, because that is what Emmeline would have done. and so we are left with fragments, a name, a green shawl, a mission, a death. But from these fragments, a picture emerges, not of a side character, but of a woman who was the very definition of resistance. She is every unsung hero, every unknown soldier, every name etched in invisible ink on the pages of history. As we revisit the story of Harry Potter, let us not only cheer for the chosen ones, but bow our heads for the forgotten. Emmeline Vance did not need a prophecy to be great. She chose the path with no spotlight, no certainty, no promise of triumph. And when her end came, she met it not with fear, but with the knowledge that she had done her part. Her memory lingers, not because the books insist upon it, but because the silence after her loss is deafening. Dumbledore's words remain, a terrible loss, and that is enough. Number 18, Astoria Greengrass. Astoria Greengrass is a name that echoes quietly through the shadows of the Harry Potter universe. Unlike the louder, more dramatic figures of her generation, she never sought attention, never stood on the front lines, and never claimed the spotlight. And yet, her silent defiance and quiet strength altered the legacy of the Malfoy family forever. To understand the transformation of Draco Malfoy in the post-war world, one cannot overlook the woman by his side. Astoria's presence in Draco's life was not merely ornamental, it was foundational. Born into the Greengrass family, Astoria came from a long line of pure-blood wizards, a house steeped in the traditions and ideologies that had once fueled the darkest corners of magical Britain. But Astoria was not shaped by the mold her ancestry tried to cast her into. The Second Wizarding War, with all its devastation and cruelty, left a permanent scar on her worldview. She was still a child during Voldemort's rise, but even young eyes saw enough. From the whispers in her family drawing room to the deaths of classmates and neighbours, she developed a quiet contempt for the notion that blood defined worth. After the fall of Voldemort, the wizarding world stood in fragile recovery, and few families were as marked by shame and suspicion as the Malfoys. Their wealth and pure blood name couldn't shield them from the social consequences of their wartime allegiances. Draco Malfoy, once proud and cruel, bore the burden of his past in a silence that mirrored the disdain of the world around him. When Astoria met Draco, he was no longer the boy who sneered in the corridors of Hogwarts. He was a man adrift, haunted by choices made in desperation, and uncertain about what kind of life he was still allowed to live. Their courtship, though unchronicled in the books, was not a tale of perfect harmony. It was filled with tension, resistance, and deep introspection. According to J.K. Rowling's own comments outside the text, Astoria was a very different kind of pure-blood witch from what Draco had been raised to value. Her rejection of blood purity, her belief in redemption, and her quiet strength stood in contrast to the values instilled in Draco since birth, and yet that difference was precisely what drew him to her. In a world where the Malfoy name had lost its once commanding prestige, Astoria dared to imagine a future defined not by legacy, but by choice. Her marriage to Draco was controversial in elite wizarding circles. Many in the old Slytherin cohort turned their backs on the couple. Friends of Lucius and Narcissa whispered behind fans and raised eyebrows at parties, but Astoria remained unshaken. Her strength did not come from confrontation, but from an unyielding calm. She was, in many ways, the eye of a storm the Malfoys had long been caught in. What is perhaps most remarkable about Astoria is her role as a mother. Her son, Scorpius Hyperion Malfoy, was raised in a household far removed from the ideology of dominance and bloodline. "He's a very sweet boy, really," Rowling once said of Scorpius, and indeed readers of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child discover a young man more interested in books and friendship than power or status. Scorpius's kindness, his deep bond with Albus Potter, and his rejection of prejudice did not emerge by accident. It was a reflection of the home Astoria built. Astoria's influence did not erase Draco's past, but it gave him the tools to reckon with it. In Cursed Child, we meet a Draco who is distant but not cruel, wounded but not closed. His devotion to his son is absolute. At one point he says with aching vulnerability, I would sell my soul for another minute with Astoria." This line, brief but weighted with emotion, tells us everything about their marriage. She was his solace. She was the light in a darkened hallway he had wandered through alone for too long. Astoria's health was fragile. She suffered from a blood curse, one that Rowling notes had plagued her since childhood. Her body, like her spirit, had always fought battles others couldn't see. By the time Scorpius was born, it was already clear that her life would be short. And yet, knowing this, she chose to bring new life into the world. She chose to raise a child in love, despite the shadow of death hanging over her. This choice, so full of hope and defiance, is a testament to the quiet bravery that defined her life. Astoria's death marked a turning point in Draco's journey. He was left to raise Scorpius alone, and with that responsibility came a devotion deeper than anything he had known. In the book, Draco explains how Scorpius grew up without his mother's love, but was raised on the memory of her kindness. Astoria became a ghost in the Malfoy manor, not the kind that haunted halls, but the kind that shaped hearts. She remained in Draco's thoughts, in Scorpius's values, in the air of the home they both inhabited. Astoria did not fight in battles with a wand in her hand. She didn't stand in the Great Hall during the final moments of Voldemort's reign. She never confronted Death Eaters in dramatic duels. But what she did was perhaps more revolutionary. She altered the course of a family that once stood for everything Voldemort believed in. She raised a son who forged a bond with the child of his father's enemy. She turned the House of Malfoy into something resembling a home. In this way, Astoria embodies one of the central messages of the Harry Potter series, that true change often begins in the smallest of places, with a choice, with a conversation, with a refusal to follow the crowd. Her legacy is not written in the pages of history books, but in the way Scorpius smiles, in the way Draco listens, in the space between past and future where healing begins. It is worth noting how Rowling carefully designed her characters to evolve through love. Just as Lily's love saved Harry and Molly's love defined the Weasleys, Astoria's love resurrected the possibility of goodness in a man taught to despise it. Draco, once a symbol of privilege and prejudice, became a devoted father, not by force, but by inspiration. And that inspiration was Astoria. Her presence, though quiet in the canon, is thunderous in implication. Without her, Scorpius may have become another heir of bitterness. Without her, Draco might have remained a prisoner of guilt. But with her, the Malfoys stepped into the new century not as relics, but as proof that people can change. It is also poignant that Astoria's rejection of pure blood supremacy was not loud or confrontational. She did not go to rallies or write articles. Instead, she simply lived differently. She loved differently. And that was enough to make others uncomfortable, to alienate her from old friends, to place her on the margins of the very world she was born into. Yet she never regretted it. Her life was short, but deeply meaningful. Rowling once said that Astoria stood apart from other pure bloods because she had seen what prejudice had done to the world. This line suggests not only wisdom, but clarity. Astoria was not ignorant of the price of her choices. She knew what it meant to marry a Malfoy. She knew what it meant to raise a tolerant child in an intolerant world, and still she chose to do so. In literature, we often chase the grand gesture, the dramatic rebellion, the loud speech, but Astoria's rebellion was domestic. It was made in bedtime stories, in whispered reassurances, in how she looked at her son when he asked about the past. Her revolution was in the private world of family, a place where old legacies are either repeated or rewritten. Even in her death, she remained a compass for those she loved. Draco did not retreat into bitterness. Scorpius did not grow up angry. Instead, they carried her values forward. And that is no small feat in a family that once prided itself on elitism and detachment. Astoria taught them warmth. To understand the importance of Astoria Greengrass is to understand the quiet power of goodness. She didn't need applause or acknowledgement. Her legacy was never about her, it was about the future she wanted to shape. And through Draco and Scorpius, she succeeded. She made the Malfoy name mean something new. That, in the end, may be the most powerful kind of magic there is. Number 19, Hestia Jones. There are heroes in the wizarding world whose names are carved into the legends of resistance. Albus Dumbledore, Sirius Black, Minerva McGonagall. And then there are those whose bravery hums like a quiet song beneath the thunderous applause, unnoticed by the crowds but no less vital.
Hestia. Kan jag tog sig en battling mot lägga ett whack off a protective spell. Ja, då finner man inte av det sekund och det finner kan ju rubberi actually. That is the ape mine and the hall, but it has gone to be shoes of equality and relentless. He never recorded glory. She did not seek to be known when the hour of courage. All right, but she's stood among us as but forward, when they're in the hair, steady, to the defining moment. For a prevent trial. Harry away from Voldemort, waiting day. It was one of the few slated to escort him to safety. It was not a glamorous stack, it was a hesitation of flames through the side with danger at heels of sheepness, life between Harry and destruction. That night, known as the Battle of the Seven Potter. Commissioner was a colleague, but remember the order, the risks, and it they went. Hesitate, we did us a deal, seemed to protect the Dursleys as well. Their task was not as elated as the others. They actually had a guy's one day, but it can be. And the right thing to do, and it was during the vision that as his oral compass suddenly the startling clarity was is there, it's the rituals and noticed warmth of an ordinary wizard. He encountered something that moved far more than any feature or spell. She saw the weasel through the many twigs for granted. She saw the love things and actors that word felt more powerful than an American who had seen the incident of the orders of others who had to risk legal Harry. It was to cheat and to their daily days, giving what little they had and sharing that they're all raising their children in truth and resistance to another one who understood the XFO has the had seen noble families torn apart. He knew that the heroism wasn't always in dueling ethics. The face of Curly, Hestia Jones rarely appears in the narrative history that finds equal her name is mentioned, and but her role condensed.
She was part of the machinery that kept Harry alive, that carried the resistance forward, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet fortitude that so often wins wars. One must understand what it meant to be part of the Order in those days. The Ministry of Magic had fallen. Voldemort had seized control of the airwaves, the press, and the courts. Every move the Order made was illegal, every meeting an act of sedition. Being a member was to accept a life of secrecy, of fear, of unending vigilance. To join was to say, I may die for this, but it is worth dying for. In that crucible, Hestia stood unflinching. There is no tale of her defeating a dozen Death Eaters. She did not shout from the ramparts or lead a charge at Hogwarts. But in protecting Harry's escape and honouring the unsung strength of others, she wove herself into the very fabric of resistance. When others turned away, when families fell apart in fear, Hestia stepped forward. The Tonks household, where she stayed briefly, was itself a symbol of defiance. Andromeda Black, sister to Bellatrix Lestrange, had been cast out of her family for marrying a Muggle-born. Ted Tonks, kind and principled, was marked for death. Their daughter, Nymphadora Tonks, was married to Remus Lupin, a werewolf, an outcast. In this home, Hestia saw not shame, but strength, and when she praised the Weasleys, it was not only for their courage, but because she understood what it meant to be condemned by the world and still choose what was right. Her voice in that moment becomes more than dialogue. It becomes legacy. In a book where prejudice runs rampant, where blood purity is worshipped by the villains, Hestia cuts through with a reminder that nobility is not born, it is earned. Her respect for the Weasleys speaks volumes of her values: inclusivity, loyalty, heart. It is too easy to forget the women in the background of great stories. Hestia, with her dark hair and sharp eyes, is often overshadowed by louder characters. But in many ways, she reflects the soul of the Order itself, not in its fireworks, but in its roots. Dumbledore trusted her. That alone speaks volumes. He did not extend trust lightly. When the life of Harry Potter was at stake, Hestia was one of the names he called. Consider what it means to be trusted with that task. The boy who lived hunted relentlessly, bearing the weight of prophecy. To be asked to help him escape, to carry out part of the plan, was to be entrusted with the fate of the wizarding world. Hestia did not falter. Her wand was steady. Her heart did not yield. Some may question why she was chosen. Why not someone more famous? But perhaps that was precisely why. She was steady, invisible in the right ways, and solid when it mattered most. The Order thrived because of people like her, because of those who needed no spotlight to do what was necessary. Her brief appearance also serves as a mirror to the theme Rowling weaves again and again, that heroism is rarely glamorous. Often it is lonely, often it is ignored, but it is essential. Without Hestia and others like her, the resistance would have collapsed. The victory at Hogwarts would never have come. And even after her task was done, we know she continued to serve. She did not fade away. The Second Order was not disbanded after Harry reached the Burrow. On the contrary, the mission grew more dangerous. Hestia's name appears again as one of those watching over the Dursleys, a task filled with tension because they represented everything Harry had to escape from, and yet were bound to him by blood. Her presence reminds us of a truth that the wizarding world too often forgets. Even the difficult must be protected. Even the unkind deserves safety, not for their own sake, but because it is what justice demands. That is the morality Hestia upheld, unyielding, impartial, deeply human. In the final tally of war, names are etched into memorials. Statues are built for fallen legends. But in the quiet corners of the world, in the hearts of those who survived, people like Hestia Jones are remembered with reverence, not because they shone brightly, but because they refused to go out. The Battle of Hogwarts was won by giants and ghosts and centaurs, but it was also won by those who paved the road there, who risked themselves in the long, thankless nights before the dawn. Hestia was one of them. She was not there for the final fight, but without her, many would not have survived to see it. As fans return to the series, combing over names and faces, perhaps it is time we look again at those we missed, the women in the shadows, the protectors, the quiet watchers, the ones who called the Weasleys heroes and meant it with all their soul. Hestia Jones may not have a chapter to her name, but she has a place in the story, in the choices she made, in the courage she held, in the truth she spoke. She stands among the best of them, a guardian, a believer, a hero in her own right. And perhaps when the war is finally over and the wizarding world rebuilds, it is names like hers that will remind us what true resistance looks like. Not thunder, not spectacle, but steadiness. Quiet, enduring light in a world that tried to go dark. Number 20, Peeves. Of all the beings who roamed the hallowed halls of Hogwarts, few were as infamous and as strangely beloved as Peeves the poltergeist. Chaotic, uncontainable, and utterly unpredictable, Peeves was more than a nuisance. He was an institution. He was never alive, yet his presence felt more tangible than many a breathing professor. What made him special wasn't just his pranks or his irreverence, but the strange way in which he belonged to the very spirit of the castle. He was Hogwarts' shadow self, its wild grin in times of order, its wicked laughter in moments too serious for comfort. And when the final battle came, the castle called on all its spirits, even the spirit of mischief. From the very beginning, Peeves made himself known. He didn't tiptoe into the reader's imagination. He blasted in, singing off-key and pelting students with chalk. He took childish glee in tormenting Filch, once dropping a bag of flour over his head, and endlessly taunted Professor Snape, singing rhymes like, "Oh, Potter, you rotter," with scandalous delight. But Peeves was not just comic relief. He was an echo of the castle's memory. He had seen more than most professors, having haunted Hogwarts for centuries, and his allegiance, though often to no one, was ultimately to the school itself. Though he never made it into the film adaptations, his absence is one of the greatest omissions of the entire franchise. Christopher Columbus, the director of the first Harry Potter film, actually cast Rick Mayall to play Peeves, and scenes were filmed, but they never made the final cut. It's a strange irony. A being who defied rules, systems, and all forms of control was, in the end, edited out, rejected by the very machinery of cinema that he would have undoubtedly mocked. Yet in the books, Peeves remains vividly alive, irritating, hysterical, but unforgettable. During the climactic events of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Hogwarts was not just a battlefield, it was a living entity defending itself. The suits of armor moved, the staircases trembled, the house elves armed themselves in the kitchens, and in the chaos of war, Peeves too rose. He did not hide, he did not flee. Instead, he did what only he could. He became the spirit of rebellion. Professor McGonagall herself, the embodiment of order and discipline, turned to him in this moment of darkness. "Give her hell from us, Peeves," she said, a sentence that still sparkles with mischief and gravitas alike. And give them hell he did. Armed with an arsenal of jokes, explosives, and invisible tricks, Peeves descended on the Death Eaters with a vengeance. Fred and George Weasley might have been his favorite students, but in that moment he honored every single young wizard who had ever laughed at one of his stunts. Peeves soared through the corridors with a vengeful cackle, dropping dung bombs, overturning suits of armor, and whirling invisible ropes around intruders' ankles. The castle roared with his joy, as though Hogwarts itself had given him permission to unleash the full force of his anarchic power. It is important to recognize the beauty in McGonagall's trust. The strict, no-nonsense deputy headmistress, who had spent years trying to keep Peeves under control, finally gave him a command, not to behave, not to be silent, but to be himself. "Show them what you can do," she told him. And in that simple directive was a moment of profound truth, because Peeves, for all his disorder, had a heart, not a heart of flesh and blood, but a heart bound to the stones of Hogwarts, a heart that knew when it was time to stop being a jester and become a warrior. Peeves didn't wear a uniform, he didn't swear an oath, but his actions were louder than any vow. He hurled chalk like shrapnel and screamed songs of mockery that cut deeper than spells. He hovered above the fray, a chaos elemental, making sure no Death Eater had peace within the walls of the only true home he had ever known. When the ghosts looked on in solemn silence, nearly headless Nick, the Bloody Baron, the Fat Friar, Peeves made noise, because silence had never been his way. In making noise, he made a stand. One of the most telling lines comes from the final pages of Deathly Hallows, though many forget it. As the sun rises on the ruins of war, we read, "Even Peeves joined in, whooping gleefully as he zoomed through the air, throwing chairs and tables." This is not a passing moment. It is a final testament. Hogwarts was defended not only by wizards and witches, but by ghosts, centaurs, and, yes, poltergeists. The very soul of the school came alive, and Peeves, unpredictable as ever, chose the side of light. It is also essential to remember that Peeves never swore loyalty to any headmaster, not Dumbledore, not Umbridge, not even the Founders. He operated by his own rules. His only true allegiance was to chaos and to the children who brought it to life. He adored the Marauders and later Fred and George. He recognized in them the same spark that burned within him, the sacred joy of breaking rules for the right reasons. He tormented when it pleased him, but he loved in his own bizarre way. Why then was he never allowed to step into the frame of the films? Perhaps because he could not be controlled. Perhaps because cinema seeks order, and Peeves was disorder incarnate. But the books give him space. Rowling herself understood his power. She wrote him not as an enemy, but as an agent of mischief who could, in the moment of greatest peril, become a sword of chaos, yes, but a sword nonetheless. Peeves reminds us that not all heroes wear robes of glory. Some wear jester hats and sing rude songs. Some heroes are not noble by nature, but rise when the world demands it. Peeves was such a hero, an accidental one perhaps, but a hero all the same. He reminded readers that courage takes many forms and that even a poltergeist can choose to fight for something bigger than himself. When the dust settled, when Hogwarts was cracked and smouldering, one could imagine Peeves floating over the great hall, singing his ridiculous songs now tinged with bittersweet triumph. He would have danced on the tables, balancing teacups on his head, not to mock but to mourn, in the only way he knew how. Through madness he made sense of sorrow. There's an ancient magic in laughter, especially in times of war. Peeves wielded this magic with more skill than most realized. His antics were not just distractions, they were rebellion against fear, against tyranny, against the crushing weight of loss. He was a beacon of foolish light in the darkest of times, a candle burning sideways, flickering through the corridors of pain. It's tempting to categorize characters as good or evil, helpful or harmful, but Peeves escapes such binaries. He is grey smoke in a world of black and white. He caused havoc, but never death. He brought chaos, but never despair. And when true despair threatened to crush Hogwarts, it was his chaos that became its defense. In this he transcended the role of trickster and became a symbol. Symbols matter in war. They are what people fight for, what they remember when the battle is over. Peeves, unintentionally, became one such symbol, a sign that Hogwarts would not go quietly, that even the ghosts of laughter would rise against the shadows. He didn't need a wand. He didn't need a prophecy. He simply needed permission to be what he always was, uncontrollable, and in the end, brave. And how strange, how fitting, that bravery would wear the mask of madness, that the wildest spirit in the castle would be the one to guard it with most fervour. He didn't ask for thanks, he wouldn't have accepted it. He would have thrown pudding at anyone who tried. But somewhere, beneath the roars and the rhymes, was a truth even Dumbledore might have smiled at. That magic, in its rawest form, needs no discipline, only purpose. It is the tragedy of adaptation that Peeves never made it to the screen. Children growing up with the films missed his chaotic wisdom. They didn't hear his rhymes, didn't see his rebellion, but in the books he lives, and in the hearts of readers he floats eternally, cackling, shouting, throwing invisible objects and invisible truths. He reminds us, always, that not all spirits haunt. Some protect, some fight, some choose light over silence. Peeves wasn't a ghost, he was the echo of youthful rebellion. He was Hogwarts' last laugh in the face of doom. And in that laugh there was power, not the power of spells or potions, but the power of choice. In the end, Peeves chose, and that made all the difference. Number 21. Lee Jordan. Few figures in the Hogwarts saga shimmer with such a strange duality as Lee Jordan. Most readers remember him as the loud, witty Quidditch commentator whose voice rang through the stands, always towing the line between impartiality and full-blown Weasley fandom. With his dreadlocks bouncing and his cheeky grin ever present, Lee was a beacon of mischief and excitement. But beneath the surface of his humour lived a fiercer fire, one that would later set the airwaves ablaze when the world around him fell into darkness. While Harry Potter was fighting in the shadows, while the Order was scattered and hunted, Lee Jordan did something profoundly brave. He picked up a microphone, not for sport, but for war. During the Second Wizarding War, when Voldemort's influence had seeped into every corner of the magical world, the Daily Prophet became a mouthpiece of propaganda. The Ministry of Magic, infiltrated and corrupted by Death Eaters, used fear to choke the truth. It was in this climate that Lee founded the underground radio program Potter Watch, a secret broadcast that delivered real news, hope, and resistance. It wasn't just a show, it was a lifeline. Lee operated under the code name River, hiding his identity to avoid detection, and assembled a small but powerful group of voices that cut through the silence of tyranny. This transformation from schoolyard joker to voice of a revolution did not happen overnight. Lee had always harbored a fierce sense of justice. He was the son of two Muggle-borns, both of whom taught him early that laughter was a weapon, and words, when used right, could set minds free. At Hogwarts, he had walked the tightrope between rule-breaking and rebellion. He smuggled in illegal fire whiskey and hexed Slytherins, yes, but he also stood up to injustice, challenged authority, and never looked the other way when others were suffering. The day the war truly reached him came not through headlines, but through whispers. A childhood friend, Maisie Dawkins, a fellow Gryffindor 2 years younger, was taken from her home and imprisoned for being Muggle-born. Her parents, non-magical and unaware of the world their daughter belonged to, simply vanished. That was Lee's breaking point. He realized that what was happening was not just political, it was personal. From that moment, silence was no longer an option. Lee gathered a crew: Kingsley Shacklebolt, who would later become Minister of Magic, Lupin, weary but unwavering, Fred and George, ever ready with a jibe and a jinx. Each took on aliases, Lee as River, Kingsley as Royal, Lupin as Romulus, and Fred as Rapier. The very code names echoed a sense of legend. Together they built something more powerful than spells: trust. The magical world had been fractured, and Potterwatch stitched pieces back together with every transmission. Their location changed constantly, protected by powerful charms and unplottable wards. Lee became the architect of truth in a world of lies. He understood the stakes. The punishment for subversive broadcasting under the new regime was Azkaban, or worse. But Lee never hesitated. He travelled from abandoned barns in the Midlands to caves in the Scottish Highlands, carrying only his magical transmitter and a bag of protective runes. Sometimes he'd arrive to find the place ransacked, a coded message warning of patrols. Other times he'd record huddled in a tent, wand in one hand and a portable microphone in the other. His broadcasts were short, sharp, and fiery. They told of the Ministry's atrocities, the Order's secret victories, and most of all they celebrated the courage of ordinary witches and wizards resisting evil. One such transmission aired just after the fall of the Lovegood household. Xenophilius, Luna's father, had tried to trade information for his daughter's life, only to fail spectacularly. The official news claimed he'd gone mad. Potterwatch told the truth. He acted out of desperation, not cowardice, Lee reported. And in that he is no different from many of us who must choose between what is right and what is safe. The Lovegoods are not traitors. They are hostages of a regime that fears the love of a father. This was Lee's genius, not merely in speaking, but in framing resistance as human. He didn't speak from a pedestal. He spoke from the mud and blood of everyday struggle. He refused to deify Harry Potter, calling him the boy who keeps on fighting rather than the chosen one. He made Harry relatable, not mythical. In one of his most moving broadcasts, he said, "Harry Potter is not our savior. He is our brother in arms, and brothers bleed." Lee's work was not without cost. His name appeared on wanted posters. His parents had to go into hiding. His childhood home in Tottenham was torched. Fred once wrote to him, "We're used to fire, mate, but this kind burns differently." And still, Lee continued. He'd lost contact with several contributors: Aurelia Flint, a Ravenclaw he trusted deeply, simply vanished after a scheduled recording. No trace, no trail. Lee never spoke of her on air, but listeners noticed a change in his tone, a bitter edge that hadn't been there before. Even in the bleakest hours, Lee made time for humour. It wasn't the jovial, unrestrained laughter of his Quidditch days. It was sharper now, political. He once described Dolores Umbridge as a toad that escaped the terrarium and took up residence in bureaucracy. He parodied ministry slogans, mocked Death Eater fashion, and compared the Snatchers to a gang of drunken nifflers stumbling through morality's jewelry box. This satire was dangerous. Insulting officials was now a criminal offence. But Lee understood what Voldemort never could. Mockery robs tyrants of their mystique. Fear only works when it is solemn. Potterwatch didn't only reach rebels, it reached the disillusioned, the frightened, even the complicit. There are accounts of Snatchers lowering their wands upon hearing Lee's voice. One such story, shared by a half-blood named Gordon Creevey, tells of a patrol pausing to listen as Lee recounted the destruction of a Muggle village. "They laughed at first," Gordon said, "until River named the children who died. Then they stopped laughing." Lee's weapon was truth, and he wielded it like a sword. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the broadcast is directly described. The voice of Lee Jordan came out of the darkness, slightly higher than usual, and trembling a little. Even the brave have trembling moments, but the voice did not waver in conviction. The segment ends with Lee's signature sign-off. "Keep twiddling those dials. The next password will be Albus. Good night, and remember, stay strong." These words were not just farewells, they were sacred mantras. The secrecy surrounding Potterwatch became legendary. The passwords changed daily, distributed through coded messages and enchanted coins. Even those who listened often never knew who was behind the mic. Some speculated it was Dumbledore himself, or Sirius Black, returned from the dead. In truth, it was Lee, scruffy, exhausted, determined Lee, risking everything to be the voice of the voiceless. And then, when the final battle came, Lee didn't retreat behind a microphone. He appeared at Hogwarts, wand drawn, fighting alongside Fred and George. He duelled Death Eaters in the very halls where he once cracked jokes. When Fred fell, something inside Lee shattered. He was found kneeling beside the body, silent for hours. No words, no broadcast could capture that grief. After the war, Lee never returned to his role as a commentator. The world had changed, and so had he. He became a journalist in truth, founding a small independent wizarding newspaper called The Ember, dedicated to uncovering corruption and preserving memories of the war. He refused several offers to join the Daily Prophet, famously saying, "I don't print what's safe, I print what's right." He later penned a memoir, Behind the Static, a raw, unflinching account of his time with Potterwatch. The book is banned in several conservative wizarding districts to this day. In it, he writes, "The war wasn't just about spells, it was about silence and sound. The right words, at the right time, saved more lives than the killing curse ever claimed." Lee Jordan remains, to this day, one of the most underrated heroes of the Resistance. Not because he didn't fight with a wand, he did, but because he chose to fight first with a microphone. He believed that stories, when told truthfully, could become armor, that the naming of a victim gave them dignity, that laughter, even in terror, could be rebellion. His broadcasts live on in magical archives studied by young journalists and auras alike. They are played in classrooms at the new Hogwarts, where defense against the dark arts is no longer just about jinxes and curses, but also about propaganda and how to resist it. And somewhere, tucked in an attic in Diagon Alley, his first transmitter sits preserved in glass, beside a plaque that reads, "To speak when others are silent is the loudest magic of all." Number 22, Pansy Parkinson. Of all the faces that moved through the dim green light of the Slytherin common room, Pansy Parkinson's is among the most overlooked. Yet her story runs deep beneath the stone floors of Hogwarts, echoing a greater tragedy. She is not merely the sneering antagonist in the background of Harry Potter's tale, nor just the girl who once clung to Draco Malfoy's arm like ivy to crumbling brick. She is a child shaped by an ancient creed, a mirror held up to a society built on lineage, pride, and fear. And although she may never have cast a heroic Patronus or stood against Voldemort in shining defiance, Pansy's place in the narrative is far more real, because she is not the embodiment of evil, but the result of it. From the very beginning, Pansy was cast in the role of antagonist. She arrived at Hogwarts already fluent in cruelty. With her pug-like face often twisted in a smirk, she taunted Hermione Granger with slurs like mudblood, mocking what others called sacred. Her laughter rang loudest when Draco made some biting remark. And yet behind that laughter, behind that facade of superiority, was a girl who had been told what to think, who to despise, and how to act. She was a Slytherin not merely by sorting hat judgment, but by cultural inheritance. Pure-blood superiority wasn't just a belief in her home, it was law. The world Pansy came from did not value kindness. It celebrated power, control, and a strict adherence to purity of blood. Her family likely raised her in drawing rooms filled with portraits of stern ancestors, where conversations about the ministry and mudbloods overrode stories of love or empathy. In such an environment, softness would be mocked. So Pansy hardened herself early. When she sneered at Neville Longbottom or laughed at Luna Lovegood, it wasn't just to belong, it was survival. She saw Hermione's intellect as a threat, not because it was wrong, but because it was dangerous to everything she had been taught. That a Muggle-born girl could outshine the purest wizard blood would unravel the very fabric of her world. So she clung harder to her scorn, used it like a shield. Calling Hermione names wasn't an act of malice, it was, in a twisted way, an act of desperation. Pansy's close association with Draco Malfoy wasn't accidental either. She gravitated toward him as if they were cut from the same cloth. Both were scions of ancient families, bound by the same beliefs and pressures. But where Draco's inner conflict became central to the plot, Pansy's remained on the periphery, buried in sneers and silence. Yet she watched him. When Draco began to falter in 6th year, when the weight of the Dark Lord's tasks aged his features overnight, Pansy didn't abandon him. In fact, Pansy Parkinson was sitting beside Draco, holding his hand, as Rowling writes in Half-Blood Prince. She stayed when others might have fled. That wasn't villainy, that was loyalty of a kind. But the cracks in her armor became most visible during the Battle of Hogwarts. As students gathered in the Great Hall and Voldemort's voice boomed like a god's over the school grounds, panic spread like fire through dry brush. It was then, when McGonagall gave them the chance to fight or flee, that Pansy revealed her true self. "But he's there! Potter's there! Someone grab him!" she shrieked, pointing at Harry. And in that moment, the room turned on her. The students rose, wands drawn, not at Harry, but at her. McGonagall ordered her removed, and with that Pansy was swept away from the story. It's easy to brand that moment as cowardice, to say she tried to sacrifice Harry to save herself. But look again. Here was a 17-year-old girl, raised in a world of control, now standing in a collapsing castle with death circling the towers. She did what she had been taught: obey, survive, eliminate threats. Her cry wasn't simply fear, it was a cry for the world to go back to how it was, before everything broke, before death came to her doorstep, before the Dark Lord returned to claim her reality. In that moment she acted not as a villain, but as a terrified child. And isn't that what so many of them were? Children thrust into war, expected to make moral decisions even adults falter before. Harry had Dumbledore, Hermione had her books, Ron had his family. Who did Pansy have? A culture of silence, a family likely steeped in tradition and fear. A boy who was slipping away from her, pulled under by darker tides. And yet, even amid the horror, Pansy never truly betrayed Hogwarts. She did not fight for Voldemort. She did not raise her wand against her classmates. She vanished from the battle, yes, but she also did not become one of the masked followers cursing innocents in the corridors. Some say absence is complicity, but perhaps for Pansy, absence was rebellion, refusal. the only resistance she could muster in a world that had given her no tools for revolution. Her story is marked by silence. After the war, we hear nothing more of her. Rowling doesn't tell us what became of Pansy Parkinson. Did she shed her inherited beliefs? Did she carry shame, or regret, or simply denial? Perhaps she married into another pure-blood family and buried the war in crystal glasses and antique furniture. Or perhaps she changed, quietly, privately, away from the eyes of those who never gave her a second look. But even within the series, there are hints of her complexity. When Hagrid is ridiculed in Goblet of Fire, it's Pansy who mocks him cruelly. "Doesn't he look like a pig with hair?" she jeers. It's not funny, it's cruel. But again, it is the voice of someone who cannot allow others to be different without mockery. Individuality threatens the order she was taught. It's the voice of insecurity masked by arrogance. Like Draco, she had learned to strike first and ask no questions later. Still, moments of humanity flicker. In Order of the Phoenix, she is part of Umbridge's inquisitorial squad, a role that gave her a sense of power and control. But when chaos erupts during Fred and George's fireworks rebellion, there's no mention of Pansy defending the authoritarian regime she was meant to support. She fades into the background again. She thrives in order but vanishes in chaos. Her power is borrowed, never truly her own. We never hear her thoughts. We don't read diary pages or inner monologues, so we must read between the lines. We must ask, who was she really? What did she dream of? Did she believe in Voldemort's ideology? Or did she merely echo the voices that fed her from birth? Was her cruelty a choice or a consequence? And if we compare her to characters like Severus Snape or Draco Malfoy, the parallels become clearer. All three were shaped by trauma, ideology, and fear. Snape found redemption through love. Draco through survival and hesitation. Pansy had no such arc, but not because she wasn't capable, because her story was never given the space. She remained a supporting character in a war she didn't start. Pansy Parkinson is not a hero, but that does not mean she is a villain. She is a character caught in the margins, a reminder that not every student at Hogwarts had the tools to defy their upbringing. Not everyone could see past their parents' beliefs, and not everyone knew how to be brave. She is the kind of character that could have been saved if only someone had tried, if only the Sorting Hat had placed her in a house where empathy mattered more than legacy, if only someone had asked why she hated instead of just punishing her for it. And yet in her fear, in her refusal to fight, in her desperate cry to hand Harry over, she was painfully, hauntingly human. "Someone grab him" wasn't just a line. It was a scream from a girl who wanted the world to stop changing, who didn't know how to exist without the structure she had always known, who wanted to live. In the end, perhaps that is her strength as a character. Not power, not morality, but realism. Because for every Hermione who rises, for every Harry who fights, there are others, quiet, confused, frightened, who run. And that doesn't make them evil, it makes them real. Pansy Parkinson reminds us that the scars of ideology run deeper than wands can reach. She is the shadow of a generation raised in prejudice, a cautionary tale not of wickedness, but of what happens when a child is never taught compassion, when cruelty is normalized, when silence is survival. In the war against Voldemort, the battle lines were clear, good and evil, light and dark, but Pansy existed in the murky middle where many real people reside. Her story may never have had a redemption arc, but it had truth, and in fiction that can be just as powerful. Number 23, Irma Pintz. In the echoing silence of the Hogwarts library, where light filtered dimly through mullioned windows and dust hovered like secrets in the air, there reigned a figure as feared as she was unnoticed. Madame Irma Pintz, thin-lipped, hawk-eyed, and perpetually scowling, moved like a shadow between the shelves. To most students, she was merely a deterrent, the guardian of spines, a cranky sentinel who glared at ink-stained fingers and hissed at careless page-turners. Even Hermione Granger, for all her reverence for books, treated Madame Pince with a peculiar blend of awe and caution. But perhaps that caution was not misplaced. Perhaps the librarian of Hogwarts was more than a human extension of a due-date stamp. Perhaps she was a true keeper of secrets, not just the ones bound in leather and ink, but those woven through the very walls of the school. There was something about Irma Pince that defied the ordinary. Her presence had no room for small talk or pleasantries. She moved with purpose, as though every second stolen from her watchful gaze might spell disaster. She was there in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, snapping at students, protecting her domain with a kind of near-sacred zeal. "Students aren't allowed in the restricted section without permission," she would mutter. But the words weren't simply school policy, they were incantations of boundary and power. There was something final in her tone, something that suggested the true danger wasn't students misbehaving, but knowledge misused. The restricted section itself was a mystery that beckoned like a whisper. Bound in faded covers, behind glass cases or enchanted locks, the books it held were not merely dangerous. They were alive. Some could scream, others could curse. Some were bound in human skin, their pages pulsing faintly, reacting to the touch. What kind of person is entrusted to guard such volumes? Not a mere clerk, surely. Not just a woman who yells at noisy readers. No, someone like Madame Pince. Someone who had perhaps seen firsthand what dark knowledge could do. Someone who, like the centaurs in the forest or the portraits in the headmaster's office, knew more than they said. For all her severity, Pince remained throughout the war. She was there during Umbridge's reign when students were tortured and magic stifled. She stayed during the Battle of Hogwarts in a library that likely shook with distant explosions while the books shivered on their shelves. She may not have raised a wand in open battle, but her presence was an act of defiance in itself. She preserved order. She preserved access. In the midst of chaos, there was still a place where the tomes were catalogued, where knowledge was protected. In a war of wands, she was the shield of parchment. Her library was not just a place of learning, it was a fortress of legacy. The Hogwarts library housed volumes centuries old, some of them penned by the founders themselves. Godric Gryffindor's own treatise on magical dueling, Rowena Ravenclaw's theories on cognitive enchantments, even darker works possibly connected to Salazar Slytherin's twisted philosophies. Such texts weren't meant for young minds. They weren't even meant for most adults. Yet they were kept, dusted, aligned, and preserved. And only Irma Pince knew where everything truly was. "You'll find nothing in the restricted section without the proper signature," she would declare. But what she meant was, you don't even know what you're looking for. When Tom Riddle still walked the halls of Hogwarts, charming teachers and terrifying orphans, he too must have passed through the library. What did Pince think of him? Did she see past the charm to the unnatural hunger in his eyes? Did she feel the chill of something wrong when he passed her desk, or perhaps returned a book he should never have had? One wonders if she was already in her post when he studied Horcruxes, when he pieced together immortality like a puzzle of forbidden pages. Did she read the same books afterward, trying to retrace the footprints of evil? The library was more than just bookshelves. It was a mirror of Hogwarts itself, vast, ancient, compartmentalized, and full of secrets. In the Chamber of Secrets, when Harry and Ron tried to research Nicholas Flamel, it was the library that held the key. When they pursued Polyjuice Potion, it was from the restricted section that Hermione stole the knowledge. Every major step in their journey began not with a spell, but with a sentence found between covers. Knowledge shaped the war long before duels began. And Pince, ever vigilant, was there at the center of it. In The Half-Blood Prince, when Harry discovered the potions textbook with handwritten notes, the library's impact again reared its head. That simple object, overlooked by Pince, changed everything. It made Harry excel in class, gave him hexes he'd never known, and whispered clues about Snape's past. Madame Pince didn't see that one coming. Or perhaps she did. Perhaps she knew exactly where that book was. Perhaps she left it where it was for a reason. The lines blur quickly between what she noticed and what she allowed. Then there is her strange, rarely discussed relationship with Argus Filch. Both were gatekeepers in their own way. Both were underappreciated, often mocked, but fiercely devoted to their roles. Some fans joke that they may have had a quiet understanding, perhaps even affection, though J.K. Rowling never confirms this. But there's poetic symmetry in the idea. Filch, the guardian of corridors; Pince, the guardian of minds. Both staunch defenders of the old ways, both unmagical in their own sense. Filch, literally; Pince, emotionally. Yet both were necessary. And what of her fear? Even the strongest gatekeeper harbours private shadows. Perhaps she feared students not because they damaged books, but because she'd seen what knowledge could do in the wrong hands. She saw Gilderoy Lockhart, arrogant and empty, deceive the wizarding world with plagiarized stories. She saw young minds like Percy Weasley's intoxicated with ambition. She saw children turned soldiers. And perhaps she realized that the greatest tragedy wasn't lost battles. It was lost innocence, corrupted through the pages of books, too potent for their age. In the Philosopher's Stone, Dumbledore tells Harry, "The truth is a beautiful and terrible thing, and should therefore be treated with great caution." Pince lived this truth. She didn't tell stories, she didn't fight battles, she didn't teach classes, but she made sure that those who wanted to learn had to earn it. In a castle full of talking hats, moving staircases, and paintings that eavesdrop, her consistency was a rare anchor. Many remember Madame Pomfrey with fondness, the gentle healer whose hands stitched together the broken bones of the next generation. But Pince was a different kind of healer, one who healed with limits. Her rules weren't meant to stifle, they were meant to protect. The library was not a playground, it was sacred ground, a place where a curious hand could accidentally find a book on soul-splitting or conjuration magic older than language. She enforced silence not for quiet's sake, but for reverence. The book spoke, if one listened, and only she knew the voices that lingered behind the pages. Madame Pince's greatest legacy may not be in the stories told about her, but in the stories never told, because she prevented them. How many dark spells were not cast because she denied access? How many secrets remained buried because she refused a signature? How many lives were protected by her cold stare, her iron rules, her firm refusal? The true weight of her role is invisible, but it is undeniable. When the final battle ended and the dust of war settled across the ruined halls of Hogwarts, we do not hear of Irma Pince fleeing. We do not see her fall. One imagines her stepping over rubble to reshelve fallen books, lifting a torn copy of Hogwarts, a history with a sigh, dusting it off, and returning it to its rightful place. While others wept, she restored. While others moved on, she catalogued the broken. She was not interested in medals. Her victory was order. It is tempting to reduce her to a joke, a grouchy librarian obsessed with neatness, but this is the easy way out. The truth is, Irma Pince was the person who reminded everyone, from Dumbledore to Draco, that knowledge is a power more explosive than any curse. That magic begins in books. That understanding comes with price, and that some knowledge is too dangerous to touch without trembling hands. Rowling gave us many heroes, the brave, the loyal, the cunning, the wise. But some of her most subtle creations carried the deepest truths. Pince never wore house colours, she never took sides, but she knew that even in war the preservation of knowledge was essential. Without the memory of what came before, there could be no future. And without someone to guard that memory, it would turn to ash. She knew the lineage of spells. She knew which books had been removed, which were banned, and which were whispered about in corners. She knew what Grindelwald had once studied, what Dumbledore had hidden, what Snape had scribbled in margins. She knew what Tom Riddle borrowed. And perhaps, in the privacy of her own thoughts, she wondered what would happen if she ever spoke aloud what she had seen. Some say the pen is mightier than the sword. Irma Pintz might have scoffed, not because she disagreed, but because she knew the truth ran deeper. The book is mightier than the wand, because within a book is permanence, within a book is memory, within a book is magic that lives forever, even if the writer dies, even if the war ends, even if the tower falls. The story of Irma Pintz is not about battles or bravery in the field. It is about silent strength, about doing your duty in the shadows, about protecting a legacy so that others, even those too young or foolish to know what it means, might one day understand. She was not the storm, she was the vault. And that is why in the world of Hogwarts, where bravery is celebrated and love saves lives, we must not forget the woman who, with spine-straight posture and hawk-sharp eyes, made sure that the true heart of the school, its knowledge, never fell into the wrong hands. Even heroes need someone to guard the books. Number 24, Stan Shunpike. Of all the forgotten names scattered like autumn leaves across the vast battlefield of the Second Wizarding War, few speak louder in silence than that of Stan Shunpike. Neither a warrior nor a revolutionary, neither a schemer nor a hero, Stan was simply a young man with a toothy grin, an oversized uniform, and dreams too small to pose any threat to anyone. And yet he was arrested, branded, and thrown into Azkaban as if he were one of the Dark Lord's fiercest agents. It was not for what he did, but for what he symbolized, the expendability of the ordinary in times of panic. Stan first appeared to readers as the conductor of the night bus, an eccentric magical vehicle that arrives at the wave of a wand to rescue stranded witches and wizards. His energy was unmistakable, eager, bumbling with a streetwise charm unique to a boy raised outside the halls of power. When Harry Potter first met him in The Prisoner of Azkaban, he was 15, with large, protruding ears and a voice that cracked from adolescence. He read the Daily Prophet but understood little of the political storm it contained. Stan was a teenager trying to act grown-up, a boy who repeated what he overheard and boasted stories to sound important. In war, such innocence becomes dangerous. By the time Voldemort had returned, and the Ministry of Magic descended into a state of defensive paranoia, Stan Shunpike had become the kind of person easy to accuse and impossible to defend. He was arrested on charges of associating with Death Eaters, though no concrete evidence was ever presented. His arrest was announced in the Half-Blood Prince, when Minister Scrimgeour boasted about having rounded up several suspected Death Eaters, naming Stan among them. Harry, upon hearing this, immediately questioned the legitimacy of the arrest. "Stan Shunpike never joined the Death Eaters," he said bitterly. "He's just stupid enough to tell people he has, to make himself sound more interesting." And there it was, laid bare by the one person who had always seen through illusions. Harry Potter, a boy raised in neglect, shaped by hardship, and trained to read between the lines. Harry understood what Scrimgeour and his ministry refused to admit. The war was becoming more about appearance than justice. Stan's imprisonment was not about safety, it was about spectacle. In his eagerness to demonstrate control, Scrimgeour sacrificed the rights of a naive young man to maintain the illusion of order. Stan's story did not end with arrest. His name re-emerged in The Deathly Hallows, but now cloaked in a deeper tragedy. During the chaotic escape from Privet Drive, Stan appeared among the Death Eaters pursuing Harry and his allies through the skies. But even then Harry held back from striking him. "He's under the Imperious curse," he shouted, refusing to harm someone who had likely been coerced into violence. This moment speaks volumes, not only about Harry's moral compass, but also about Stan's continued role as a pawn in a larger game. How had Stan, a teenager, once obsessed with celebrity gossip and bus schedules, become a tool in the Dark Lord's army? The answer is grim. Because it was easy. Because no one came for him when he was arrested. Because no one protested his imprisonment. Left to rot in Azkaban, perhaps tortured or simply broken, he became another face the Death Eaters could use to confuse or overwhelm their enemies. Whether by imperious or desperation, he was drawn into the vortex he had never asked to be part of. In literature, there are characters whose purpose is to reflect grandeur, power, or tragedy. Stan Shunpike reflects bureaucracy, cowardice, and the cost of indifference. He is what happens when the system focuses more on proving its competence than enacting real justice. His case is reminiscent of those moments in history when governments, afraid of losing control, sacrifice the individual to reassure the collective. In that sense, Stan becomes more than a side character, he becomes a symbol. The wizarding world at war was full of such symbols, people flattened into roles they never auditioned for. But Stan is unique because of his sheer ordinariness. He was not a friend of the trio, he was not part of Dumbledore's army or the Order of the Phoenix. He was not a Slytherin or a Hufflepuff with a secret past. He was a bloke who handed out tickets, cracked jokes, and got things a little wrong. And for that he was punished. His arrest highlighted the Ministry's descent into desperation. When Fudge fell and Scrimgeour took over, there was no shift toward truth, only a shift in style. The new minister was no less self-serving. He, like Fudge, valued perception over reality. And Stan Shunpike was the perfect scapegoat, young enough to seem malleable, obscure enough that few would care, and common enough that the public would feel reassured by his arrest. If even the bus conductor could be a Death Eater, then perhaps the Ministry truly was watching everywhere. But this logic only revealed the cracks in the system. The arrest and continued imprisonment of Stan damaged public trust far more than any actual criminal could have. Wizards and witches began to whisper, if someone like Stan could be accused, what hope was there for the rest of them? Fear breeds silence, and silence breeds submission. That is how tyranny grows, not with shouts, but with shrugged shoulders. It is important to remember that Stan's role in the Death Eaters' attack on the Seven Potters was not necessarily voluntary. The books never confirm whether he joined Voldemort by choice. The more likely truth is that, like many others, he was broken by a system that refused to protect him. Once imprisoned in Azkaban, a place known to destroy minds as much as bodies, he would have been left vulnerable to suggestion, manipulation, and curses. In a tragic way, Stan's downfall serves as a dark mirror to the stories of redemption that permeate the series. Where Severus Snape had a complex past and made sacrifices for love, where Draco Malfoy struggled with pressure and emerged hesitant but free, Stan had no such arc. No grand redemption, no final duel. He simply faded, absorbed into the machinery of war. He was never evil enough to hate or good enough to save. And that is the most chilling part. What makes his case so haunting is that it is not exceptional, it is common. In times of war, there are always those swept away by the tide, unnoticed until it is too late. The wizarding world tried to simplify things into black and white, good versus evil, light versus dark. But Stan reminds us that in every war there are shades of grey. There are people who don't fit the narrative, who become inconvenient truths, and Harry knew this. That's why his refusal to attack Stan during the chase is so moving. Despite being hunted, despite fearing for his life, Harry saw through the illusion. He understood that the man in front of him was not a Death Eater in the traditional sense, but a casualty, a symbol of everything the Ministry got wrong. In a war for souls, Stan's was one of the first sacrificed, not to Voldemort, but to fear. Later, as the world celebrated Voldemort's defeat, there was no parade for people like Stan, no Ministry apologies, no acknowledgement. His story, if ever revisited, would be footnoted as a regrettable error, if mentioned at all. The truth is, many like him likely vanished into obscurity, and that is the price of conflict not fought with clarity, but with panic. Stan's character is a warning, not just to wizards, but to readers. It is a reminder that the line between justice and injustice is thinner than we think, and it often frays at the expense of the powerless. His life, uneventful, until politics swallowed it, is a parable for every time the state chooses security over fairness. Rowling, in creating Stan, gave voice to a type of suffering often ignored. It is not the suffering of battle scars or heroes' burdens, but of erasure. He is not mourned because he was never celebrated. He is not hated because he was never understood. He exists in that liminal space of human tragedy where victims do not scream, they simply disappear. Perhaps the most powerful testament to Stan's importance is how little it takes to understand his injustice. All Harry needed was one sentence. He's just stupid enough to tell people he has. In that moment, the machinery of propaganda, paranoia, and political theatre collapsed. It revealed that fear, when left unchecked, will always feed on the innocent first. Stan Shunpike is the boy next door who disappeared and returned, unrecognizable. He is the warning we ignore, the headline we skim, the arrest we rationalize. He is the reminder that in every magical war, the most magical act is to protect those who cannot protect themselves. In this way, his story, quiet as it may be, echoes louder than 1,000 spells. And in the final tally of the war, when heroes stood in rubble and the world tried to heal, there must have been, somewhere, a quiet bus stop, empty, still, waiting for a conductor who never came back. A small place in the magical world where justice, once overlooked, still waits. Number 25. James Potter. Of all the names whispered through the corridors of Hogwarts, James Potter is perhaps the most misunderstood. His image is fractured, reflected in the memories of others, shaped by youthful arrogance, and occasionally overshadowed by the legendary status of his son. Yet behind the glint of mischief and the tousled black hair was a boy who became a man and then a hero. James's early reputation at Hogwarts is easy to summarize, but dangerously incomplete. He was brilliant at Quidditch, a natural leader, and had an almost magnetic charisma. His friends, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, gravitated toward him not simply because he was confident, but because he cared for them with a loyalty that ran deeper than most could see. To call him simply a prankster is to reduce a complex soul to a caricature. He created the Marauders map, yes, but he also spent countless nights helping Remus cope with lycanthropy, a secret that could have ruined them all. Who else but James would dare befriend a werewolf, not from pity, but from love? The popular memory of James is inevitably coloured by the glimpse we are given through Severus Snape's eyes. A teenage boy laughing cruelly, humiliating a peer. Snivelous, he calls him, flicking his wand as the crowd watches. It is a powerful scene, and many readers stop there. But to understand James is to acknowledge both this immaturity and the change that followed. He was 15 then, and he died at 21. Between those years lies a transformation as significant as any in the series. Consider the man who joined the Order of the Phoenix at barely 18, standing shoulder to shoulder with legends like Alastair Moody, Emmeline Vance, and Marlene McKinnon. He wasn't playing games anymore. He was risking his life to oppose Voldemort at a time when hope was scarce and fear reigned. Every mission meant danger. Every knock at the door could be his last. Still he fought. There was no glory in it, just the unspoken promise that he would not stand by while darkness rose. More than anything, James Potter was a father, not a symbol, not a flash of memory, but a living, breathing father. For one brief year, he held Harry in his arms, chased him around the small kitchen of their cottage in Godric's Hollow, laughed at his first words. These moments are not in the books, but they are etched into the silence behind every photograph. When Hagrid hands Harry to Dumbledore on Privet Drive, when Sirius gives him the motorbike, James's absence is a wound that never quite heals. And what of his final moments? James did not have his wand. He was caught unarmed, startled by Voldemort's sudden arrival. Yet he did not flee. He didn't beg. He told Lily to run. "Take Harry and go! It's him! Go run! I'll hold him off!" The line is brief, almost throwaway, in the Philosopher's Stone, but in it lies a universe of courage. He stood between his family and death, with nothing but his body and his will. He knew what would happen. He did it anyway. The James we rarely speak of is the man who changed. Sirius, who knew him better than anyone, once said, "He grew out of it, Lily. He really did." These aren't the words of a friend trying to rewrite history. They are the testimony of someone who watched James choose kindness over cruelty, responsibility over pride. He married the woman he once teased. He fought beside her. And when the time came, he died to protect her and their child. It is ironic that Severus Snape, who despised James, is remembered for his sacrifice, while James's own is treated as an obligation, something expected of him. But James didn't have to die. He could have chosen to hide, to abandon the order, to save himself. Others did. He didn't. His death was not inevitable. It was a choice. In his school days, James saved Snape's life, when Sirius, in a moment of vindictive foolishness, sent Severus toward the Whomping Willow to discover Remus's secret. It was James who pulled him back. He didn't have to. He could have let a rival walk into danger. But he didn't. He understood consequences. He took responsibility. That moment is never celebrated, but it should be. Lily Potter did not marry a bully. She married a man she believed in. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry sees the pensive memory, his view of his father shatters. But as Sirius and Remus tell him, that memory is not the whole story. People are not static. James was young. He was flawed. But he had the courage to grow. And that growth is where the real magic lies. There is a quiet dignity to James that is often missed. He never returned as a ghost, though he could have. He left no diary, no haunting memories. He allowed his son to become his own man. Even in the brief moments when his echo appears, in the cemetery at Little Hangleton, or in the golden light of the resurrection stone, he does not advise or scold or lament. He simply stands beside his son, proud and silent. The stag, his animagus form, is not just a symbol of strength, but of guardianship. Prongs, they called him. It is fitting, a creature who leads, who defends, who watches. Even in death he guards. It is James's Patronus that gives Harry hope, that drives away the Dementors. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when Harry believes he sees his father across the lake, he doesn't just see a ghost, he sees the reflection of all James left behind. James was also the first marauder to fall. Followed by Peter's betrayal, Sirius's imprisonment, and Remus's exile, the group that had once laughed under the stars was broken. But James, for all his youth, had already achieved what mattered most. He had created a life worth protecting, and when that life was threatened, he gave all he had to shield it. His name is often invoked with pride, but rarely explored. James is not mysterious like Dumbledore, nor controversial like Snape, but he is essential. Without James, there is no Harry, not just in the biological sense, but in the moral one. The values that define Harry, bravery, loyalty, love, are rooted in James's sacrifice. He loved fiercely. He lived with purpose. He made mistakes and he corrected them. He died too soon. There is tragedy in that, yes, but also beauty. Because in those 21 years, James lived fully. He fought for what was right. He protected what he loved. And he passed on not just a legacy, but a light. Harry, who never knew his father, is still shaped by him. When he calls his son James Sirius Potter, it is not just a gesture. It is a resurrection, a quiet tribute, a way of saying, I remember. When he conjures a Patronus in the form of a stag, when he leads Dumbledore's army, when he faces death without fear, he carries James with him. In Deathly Hallows, when Harry walks into the forest to meet Voldemort, he uses the resurrection stone. And James appears calm and steady as if no time has passed. You are nearly there, he says. He does not plead. He does not cry. He simply stands, a presence of strength. In that moment, James is exactly who he was in life, a father who walks with his son through the darkness. James Potter is not forgotten, but he is too often flattened into a symbol. He was not perfect. He was not a saint. But he was something rarer, a good man who changed, who loved, who stood firm in the face of death. He is the kind of hero we overlook because his story ends before it begins. We owe James more than memory. We owe him recognition. He was not merely the father of the boy who lived, he was the man who died so the boy could live, wand in his pocket, heart on his sleeve, and courage written into every heartbeat. His life was short, but it mattered, and perhaps that is the greatest magic of all. Number 26. Narcissa Malfoy. Narcissa Malfoy, born Narcissa Black, is a name that rarely appears in the spotlight of heroism. Yet in the shadows of a world torn by war and corrupted by ideology, it was she, quiet, proud, and fiercely maternal, who delivered one of the most pivotal decisions in the entire Harry Potter saga. Dismissed by many as merely another cold and aristocratic pure-blood elitist, Narcissa proved to be something entirely different when it truly mattered. Her silence became a sword, her love, a rebellion, her lie, the salvation of a boy she had no reason to protect, except for the truth that no one else was brave enough to face. Raised in the hallowed halls of the Black family estate, Narcissa was the youngest of three sisters, trailing behind the infamous Bellatrix Lestrange and the estranged Andromeda Tonks. Where Bellatrix embraced madness and Andromeda rejected blood purity altogether, Narcissa walked a dangerous path between them, a path cloaked in loyalty, not to Dark Lords or political causes, but to blood that pulsed in her own child's veins. She was no Death Eater. Her name was not etched on any list of known servants to Voldemort. Yet she stood in that world, married to Lucius Malfoy, bound to a man whose loyalty to the Dark Lord became a noose around his entire family. Throughout the series, Narcissa is rarely given a voice. When she does appear, it's with elegance and restraint. Her first major scene comes not through thunder or violence, but through desperate strategy. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, she risks everything by traveling to Spinner's End, seeking help from Severus Snape to protect her son. "You are, of course, devoted to the Dark Lord," she says with a voice sharp and trembling. But the terror in her words isn't for herself. It's for Draco. The mission Voldemort entrusted to her son is not a mark of honor. It is a death sentence. And Narcissa, understanding the true nature of this game, breaks the rules. She invokes an unbreakable vow binding Snape to protect Draco's life, regardless of cost. She is not asking for power. She is begging for mercy. That scene alone reveals a woman who may exist within the world of Death Eaters, but who does not belong to it. Draco's slow descent into despair throughout his 6th year is not hidden from the reader. And though Narcissa is absent from the Hogwarts scenes, her presence echoes in every burden her son carries. The weight he shoulders is not just Voldemort's demand, it is the quiet pressure of a mother's fear, of a family on the edge of collapse. When Draco fails to kill Dumbledore, it is because he is a boy, broken and trembling, not an assassin. And yet behind him always stands Narcissa, unseen, unknown to the reader's eye in that moment, but the reason why he is still alive. She arranged for Snape to be there. She set the pieces in place. It is her maternal instinct, not her ideology, that guides her. During the Battle of Hogwarts, Narcissa's most defining moment arrives like a whisper in the dark. After Voldemort casts the killing curse on Harry in the Forbidden Forest, he orders Narcissa to check if the boy lives. It is a cruel irony. Voldemort believes he commands loyalty, but he misunderstands the deeper currents that move people. When Narcissa kneels beside Harry, she feels his pulse, sees that he is alive. And then she asks one question that changes everything. Is Draco alive? In that breath, we see her entirely, not as a Malfoy, not as a Black, but as a mother. Harry nods, and Narcissa rises, turns to the Dark Lord, and lies. He is dead. That lie, simple and soft, is the turning point of the war. It allows Harry to live and eventually triumph, but more importantly, it is the ultimate rejection of Voldemort's world. Narcissa, in that moment, has no guarantee that her lie will save Draco, but she chooses truth in her own heart over loyalty to a tyrant. She chooses her son over a cause, and she chooses compassion, even for Harry, because his survival is tied to her own child's. Her lie is a rebellion dressed in silence. The importance of this moment cannot be overstated. At that point, Narcissa has every reason to obey Voldemort. Her family has suffered. Lucius has been humiliated and disarmed. Their manor had been desecrated by Voldemort himself. Bellatrix, her sister, has become an unhinged servant to the cause, and yet in the final hour, Narcissa's strength is the quietest and most vital of all. She is not fighting with spells, she is fighting with a choice. She is protecting her child, not with wand work, but with love and defiance hidden behind a mask of loyalty. What makes Narcissa so compelling is that she never sees herself as a hero. She never seeks recognition or redemption. She never changes her views about blood purity or magical hierarchy. Yet she steps outside the boundaries of her world when it demands a sacrifice she cannot accept. Her complexity lies in that contradiction. She is not good in the conventional sense, but she is not evil either. She is human. And in a world filled with characters who loudly declare their allegiances, she acts instead. It is easy to overlook characters who do not carry wands into battle. But Rowling's world is built not just on spells and duels, but on small, intimate acts of rebellion. Narcissa's story is one of the quietest and most powerful examples. She is a woman surrounded by cruelty, her husband, her sister, her master, and she resists in the only way she knows how. She shields her child. And when the time comes, she shields another's. There's a line in Deathly Hallows that encapsulates Narcissa's entire essence. As she walks back to Voldemort after lying to him, it reads, "Narcissa knew that she must act as though the boy were dead." That line, simple and chilling, shows the courage it takes to wear a mask and keep wearing it, to walk the line between truth and death. She is playing a deadly game, and she wins not for herself, but for her son. Her relationship with Bellatrix makes her even more interesting. Bellatrix represents blind loyalty, rage, and fanaticism. She would die for Voldemort, and does. Narcissa, by contrast, would never die for a cause she doesn't believe in. She would kill, if needed, to protect her son. That distinction is vital. One is a servant of destruction, the other is a mother who bends every rule to protect what she loves. Their contrast makes Narcissa's strength even more pronounced. Her marriage to Lucius, too, is marked by power and fear. Lucius begins the series as an emblem of arrogance and influence. By the end, he is broken, defeated, and lost. It is Narcissa who holds the Malfoy family together. She reclaims the dignity her husband loses. In the final moments of the war, when Hogwarts lies in ruins and Voldemort's body lies lifeless on the floor, it is the Malfoys who walk away, not as victors, not as heroes, but as survivors. And it is Narcissa's choices that allowed that to happen. When readers look back on the series, they often remember the grand gestures, the Dumbledore sacrifices, the Harry speeches, the Hermione logic. But in the quiet spaces between wars, there are characters like Narcissa Malfoy who change everything with a whisper. Her story is a reminder that not all heroes wear robes of gold or ride into battle. Some wear dark velvet and carry the burden of love in silence. The legacy of Narcissa Malfoy is not found in monuments or tales of victory. It's in the fact that Harry lived, that Draco lived, that the Malfoys, once symbols of cruelty, walked away from a war not as followers of darkness, but as a family reshaped by fear, love, and survival. She did not win the war, but she shifted it. She did not save the world, but she saved her son. And in doing so, she saved the boy who would go on to save everyone else. For a character with so few lines, Narcissa commands incredible narrative weight. Every moment she appears is carefully chosen, deliberate. Rowling gives her the role of a catalyst, not a commander. She moves the plot not by power, but by presence. And that, in a world where magic often means force, is a different kind of strength altogether. In many ways, Narcissa's story is the anti-Bellatrix. Where Bellatrix is fire, Narcissa is frost. Both are dangerous, both are loyal, but only one chooses love over ideology. Only one sees the cruelty of their world and dares to alter it, even if only slightly. Narcissa's refusal to conform, to be as ruthless as her sister or as fanatical as her master, is a rebellion made entirely of restraint. Even after the war, the Malfoys returned to a quiet existence, their power diminished, their name tarnished. But perhaps that is what they needed. In silence, they can heal. In privacy, Narcissa can continue doing what she always did, protect her son. That's where her story continues, not in politics, not in grand speeches, but in the corridors of Malfoy Manor, where a mother watches her child breathe safely, finally free of darkness. When Draco stands on platform 9 3/4 19 years later, watching his son board the Hogwarts Express, the echoes of his mother's sacrifice linger. He does not speak of it. He does not need to. The Malfoy legacy has shifted forever, and it began with one question, whispered in a forest of death. Is Draco alive? Narcissa Malfoy never needed a wand to defy Voldemort. She only needed love. And in the end, it was that love, not prophecy, not power, that turned the tide of war. Not all heroes shout, some whisper, and sometimes the quietest ones save the world.